What's up everyone? You're here at Arcane Paradox. We're dropping something epic today. What if Harry collapsed at the Yule Ball and Madame Pomfrey scan revealed 5 years of loyalty potions? Like and subscribe if you enjoy. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The floor of the Great Hall. The Yule Ball was everything Harry had expected it to be, which was to say it was loud, it was crowded, and he had been miserable for approximately 40 minutes before his body decided enough was enough. He remembered the warmth first, that slow, creeping heat that started somewhere behind his sternum and worked its way outward like someone had lit a fire in a room he didn't know existed. He'd been standing near the refreshment table with Ron, both of them watching the dancing with the particular brand of misery that only teenage boys who had made catastrophically bad date choices could truly appreciate. Ron was picking at a bread roll and muttering something about Victor Crumb's footwork. Harry had been nodding along without really hearing any of it. Then the heat became something else. Something with pressure behind it. "You all right?" Ron had asked, turning to look at him. Harry had opened his mouth to say yes, obviously, "Stop fussing," which was what he always said, and the floor came up to meet him. He didn't feel the impact. That was the strangest part, thinking back on it later. One moment he was standing, and then there was a sensation like every string holding him upright had been cut simultaneously, and then there was nothing at all. The Great Hall was never completely quiet. Even at midnight during a ball, with the enchanted ceiling throwing cold starlight across 500 students in their finest robes, there was always the undercurrent of it: music, laughter, the clink of goblets, the particular white noise of a place built for sound. Hogwarts breathed noise the way it breathed magic, constantly, as though silence would cause some essential structural failure. So when Harry Potter hit the flagstone floor, the quiet that followed was extraordinary. It spread outward from the refreshment table in a wave, swallowing the music, the laughter, the clink of goblets, all of it, until nearly 500 people were standing in formal robes staring at a 14-year-old boy lying motionless on the floor of the Great Hall with his dress robes twisted around him and his glasses knocked sideways. Ron was on his knees beside him before anyone else moved. Harry, come on," he grabbed his shoulder and shook once, got nothing, and his face went the particular color of old parchment. "Someone get Pomfrey." Several people moved at once. The music stuttered to a stop. Victor Crumb was pushing through the crowd from the dance floor with his jaw set, Hermione 2 steps behind him with her hand pressed to her mouth. Cedric Diggory arrived from the other direction, still holding a glass of punch, which he set down on the nearest table with extraordinary care as though he understood instinctively that the night had just changed shape. Dumbledore got there before Madame Pomfrey did. He always seemed to materialize in crisis situations, Harry had noticed over the years, appearing at the exact center of catastrophe with that long-suffering patience of his, as though he had been expecting it. He crouched beside Harry with a hand on his forehead and his expression professionally unreadable, and said something quiet to McGonagall that nobody standing nearby could quite catch. McGonagall's face did something complicated. "Albus, get Poppy," he said simply. "Quickly, please." Madame Pomfrey arrived at a half-run from the entrance hall doors, her healer's bag already open in her hand, and the crowd parted for her the way crowds always parted for people who moved with absolute conviction. She dropped to her knees on the other side of Harry from Dumbledore, pulled out her wand, and began the diagnostic before she'd even finished assessing him visually. The diagnostic spell for a Hogwarts medical emergency was a layered thing. Pomfrey had modified the standard version years ago to catch a broader spectrum of causes, because at a school full of teenagers attempting magic they weren't ready for, a narrow diagnostic missed too much. It was a slow, thorough spell, the kind that cast a faint golden net across the patient's body and read the return like a map. She watched the return for 7 seconds. Then she stopped moving. It was the stillness that people remembered afterward, not Harry on the floor, not the crowd, but Madame Pomfrey going completely, eerily still with her wand held level and her eyes fixed on the golden light hanging in the air above Harry's prone form with an expression that nobody in attendance had ever seen on her face before. Dumbledore's voice was very quiet. "Poppy." She didn't look at him. "I need everyone to step back," she said, and her voice was the wrong temperature, too flat, too careful, the voice of someone choosing every word with forceps. 10 feet, please. All of you. Headmaster, I need a privacy screen and I need it now. What is it? Ron demanded. He hadn't moved. His hand was still on Harry's shoulder. What's wrong with him? Mr. Weasley. Her eyes cut to him once. Back. Now. Ron stood up slowly, and the look on his face was the look of someone who had just understood that the ground was less solid than he thought. Dumbledore cast the privacy screen, an opaque wall of silvered magic that curved around the two of them and Harry, and the last thing anyone outside it saw before it sealed was Pomfrey's face, still doing that thing it had never done before, which was being afraid. Inside the screen, the noise of the ball became a muffle. Pomfrey ran the diagnostic again. Then a third time. Then she ran a secondary scan, the kind that required 3 wand movements and took a full minute to complete, the kind she only used when she needed to verify something she absolutely did not want to have found. The results were the same each time. She sat back on her heels and looked at Albus Dumbledore. He was watching her face. How long? She asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Albus. The word landed hard. How long? Poppy, I have a 14-year-old boy on the floor of the Great Hall with 5 years of compounded loyalty modification compounds in his bloodstream. Her voice did not rise. It was perhaps more frightening because it didn't. The collapse is a saturation crisis, his system is rejecting the accumulation. At the current concentration level, if we do not administer an antidote in the next 15 minutes, we are looking at long-term neurological consequence. So I am going to ask you one more time, and I would like very much for you to answer me, how long? The silence between them was the length of a confession. It was never intended to harm him, Dumbledore said. Poppy Pomfrey had worked at Hogwarts for 31 years. She had seen things in that hospital wing that would have dismantled a lesser person entirely. She was not a woman who was easily moved to rage, she was practical, she was professional, she had enormous reserves of clinical distance that she drew on when the work required it. She looked at Albus Dumbledore for a long moment. Then she turned back to Harry, opened her bag, and began preparing the antidote. We will speak, she said, when he is stable. You and I will speak at length, and you will bring Severus Snape with you, and between the two of you, you will tell me everything. And if you attempt to administer anything to this child, anything, a calming draught, a sleeping potion, so much as a pain reliever, without my explicit written authorization, I will go to the Board of Governors myself. Do you understand me? Dumbledore was quiet. Do you understand me, Albus? Yes, he said. I understand you. She administered the antidote. Her hands were perfectly steady. She had decided, in the space of approximately 45 seconds, that they would be. Harry woke up at 1:30 in the morning in the hospital wing, in the third bed from the door, which was where he always seemed to end up, as though Madame Pomfrey had designated it as his by some unspoken hospital wing law of nature. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the Great Hall's silence, this was the deep, wool-thick quiet of the hospital wing at night, which was its own specific kind of peace. The second thing he noticed was that his head felt different. He lay still for a moment, trying to identify the difference, because it wasn't just the absence of pain, though his head didn't hurt, which was already unusual. It was more like the removal of a sound he hadn't known was there until it stopped. A persistent low frequency, like a note held just below hearing, that he had been filtering out for so long it had simply become the texture of his own thoughts. And now it wasn't there. He reached up and touched his own temple with 2 fingers, half expecting to feel something, he didn't know what, some physical evidence of whatever had changed, but there was just his skin, and his pulse, and the cotton of the pillowcase. You're awake. Madame Pomfrey appeared from behind the curtain around the next bed with a professional quietness that suggested she'd been close by. She came to stand at the foot of his bed and looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. It was the specific expression of someone who has something to say and is calculating the least harmful way to say it. How do you feel? Strange, Harry said honestly. His voice came out lower than usual, a little rough with sleep. Different. I'm not sure how to explain it. Clarity, she said. What you're experiencing is cognitive clarity. It will feel disorienting for a little while. She pulled a chair up and sat down, which was unusual. Pomfrey generally stood, moved, adjusted, checked things. The sitting was deliberate. Harry. I need to explain what happened to you tonight and I need you to listen carefully before you react. Can you do that? He looked at her. I'm going to tell you something that is going to make you angry, she continued. Legitimately, justifiably angry. I am asking you to hold on to that anger for a few minutes while I give you all the information, because the anger will be more useful to you if you understand the full picture first. All right? What happened to me, he said. She told him. She was concise and clear and she did not hedge or soften and she did not pretend the clinical language made it less than what it was. 5 years of loyalty and compliance modification compounds, administered consistently, traces in his morning pumpkin juice, most likely, given the pattern of accumulation and the saturation points she'd identified. Compounds that subtly suppressed certain categories of impulse, suspicion of authority figures, resistance to direction, independent aggressive instinct. Nothing that would show in day-to-day behavior. Nothing that would announce itself. Just a slow, consistent softening of edges that, over 5 years, had become a fundamental alteration of cognitive baseline. The saturation crisis, the collapse, had happened because his body had finally hit a threshold. The compounds had been building since he was 9 years old. The human system could compensate for a long time, but not indefinitely. She told him the antidote had been administered. She told him his brain chemistry would normalize over the next 72 hours, that he might experience headaches, unusual emotional intensity, vivid dreaming. She told him that she had already filed an incident report with the notation that it would go to the Board of Governors unless she received sufficient explanation. She told him that she had Dumbledore's assurance, for whatever that was currently worth, and she said this without any particular inflection, that no further compounds would be administered. Harry listened to all of it. He sat in the third bed from the door in the hospital wing of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and listened to Madame Pomfrey tell him that for 5 years, someone had been putting something in his drink that made him trust the people who put it there, and he listened carefully, the way she'd asked. When she finished, the room was quiet enough to hear the castle itself, that deep structural settling sound that Hogwarts made sometimes at night, stone shifting against stone, as though the building was breathing. Who authorized it? Harry asked. I don't know the full chain yet. But you have a suspicion. She was quiet for a beat. I have a diagnosis and a specimen and a 31-year record of every student who has passed through this hospital wing. I also have a medical oath that supersedes my employment contract. Those 3 things are going to do a great deal of work in the next few days. Harry nodded slowly. He was looking at the ceiling. I want to contact Sirius. That can be arranged. Tonight. Pomfrey held his gaze. Then she stood up, straightened her robes, and said, I'll get the flu powder. You should know that Albus will almost certainly attempt to speak with you tomorrow. You are under no obligation to do so before you've spoken with your godfather and had the opportunity to think clearly. You are a patient in my ward, and I control access to my patients. That is not going to change regardless of who asks. Harry looked at her properly for the first time since he'd woken up. Why are you helping me? She stopped at the curtain. Didn't turn around. Because I'm a healer, she said. And what was done to you was an injury. Everything that follows from that is medicine. Then she was gone through the curtain, and Harry was alone in the blue-dark quiet of the hospital wing, staring at the ceiling, and everything that had ever happened to him was rearranging itself in his head like furniture being moved in a room he'd always thought he understood. The fire in the small office adjacent to the hospital wing flared green at 2:15 in the morning, and Sirius Black's head appeared in it looking like a man who had been jolted awake by something catastrophic and had not stopped moving since receiving the message. "Harry." His voice was rough and immediate. "Talk to me." Pomfrey's note said emergency, "Are you hurt?" "What happened?" Harry was sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the fireplace, close enough that the green light caught the planes of his face. He looked, Sirius thought, simultaneously younger than 14 and profoundly older than anyone had any right to be. "I collapsed at the Yule Ball," Harry said. "Madame Pomfrey ran a diagnostic. She said in her note, she said something in your bloodstream." Sirius's voice had dropped into something careful and very still. "Harry, I need you to tell me exactly what she told you. Word for word if you can." Harry told him. The silence that followed was not like the other silences in the hospital wing. This one had a specific quality, the quality of a man who had grown up in a family of dark magic practitioners, who knew the taxonomy of what had just been described, and who was doing the work of not letting his face become what his thoughts were. "Sirius," Harry said. "I'm here." The voice was controlled, but there was something running under it, tectonic, slow and enormous. "I'm here. I'm listening." "You knew something was wrong," Harry said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was a recognition. The letter you sent me before third year, you said something about trusting my instincts. You said it twice, which you never do." Sirius's jaw worked. "I noticed things," he said, carefully. "Specific things, about the way you talked about certain people. I noticed that you never questioned in the way that James questioned. Your father trusted Dumbledore, but James trusted him like he'd earned it, like he'd assessed the man and decided. The way you talked about it was different. It was more like..." He stopped. "Like it was built in," Harry said. The fire crackled. "I thought," Sirius said, "that you just had it harder. That you'd learn to defer because it was safer. I thought it was the Dursleys, I thought it was the environment." Something crossed his face that was not going to resolve itself tidily. "I should have looked harder." "You weren't here to look. That's not an excuse." "I know it's not," Harry said. "I'm not offering it as one. I'm just saying that you didn't have access and someone who did have access made a choice." He paused. The firelight moved across his face. "I want to know who signed the authorization. I want the paper trail, Sirius. Pomfrey says there will be one. Compounds like this require a potions master to prepare, and they require documentation, because the wrong concentration causes brain damage. Someone had to sign something." Sirius stared at him. "You've been awake for 2 hours, he said, not quite to himself. "I know. And you're all ready." He stopped. Started again. "Who are you right now? You sound different." Harry considered this seriously. "I think I sound like myself," he said. "Maybe for the first time." It was said without drama, without self-pity, and that was perhaps the most devastating thing about it. Sirius Black had spent 12 years in Azkaban. He knew what it looked like when a person encountered themselves for the first time without obstruction. He recognized the expression. "I'm coming to Hogsmeade," Sirius said. "Within the week. I don't care about the risk." "Don't do anything that gets you caught," Harry said immediately. "I need you free and functional more than I need you in the same room as me. Write to Remus. Tell him everything I've told you. I want 2 people who know, 2 people outside Hogwarts. Harry, and write to Amelia Bones." "The head of magical law enforcement," Sirius said, not as a question, just placing the name in the air between them like an object that needed examination. Pomfrey filed an incident report. That report will go to the Board of Governors. If it reaches the Ministry, and it should reach the Ministry, I want someone competent receiving it. Not fudge. Amelia Bones has a reputation for not being anyone's puppet." He paused. "She lost family to Voldemort. She has reasons to care about the integrity of this particular situation. Sirius was quiet for a long moment. You know, he said, Lily could do this. This exact thing. She could walk into a situation that should have broken her and come out the other side talking about legal strategy. Harry looked at the fire. What about James? James would have set something on fire by now, Sirius said. And then felt bad about it. A ghost of something real moved across his face. You've got both of them in you at once, and it's something to see. His voice roughened. I'm sorry, Harry. I'm sorry I didn't dig harder when I had the chance. You can make it right, Harry said simply. That's what I need from you. Not the apology. The work. Sirius breathed in. Out. And then he nodded, the nod of a man accepting an assignment. I'll contact Remus tonight, he said. Amelia Bones by tomorrow. And Harry, he paused. Be careful with Dumbledore when he comes to you. He is not stupid, and he is not simply malicious. That combination is more dangerous than malice alone. I know, Harry said. That's why I want everything documented before I talk to him. I want the conversation to happen on terms I've chosen, not terms he's offered me. After Sirius signed off and the fire went back to its natural orange, Harry sat in front of it for a while longer. Not thinking about Dumbledore. Not thinking about the tournament, or the second task, or any of the things he was supposed to be thinking about. Just sitting with the newness of his own head, the unfiltered, unmedicated clarity of it, turning it over the way you'd turn over something unfamiliar in your hands to understand its shape. He thought about first year. The mirror of Eriste, and the way he'd looked at it and felt a grief so enormous it had nearly swallowed him, and how the next morning he'd woken up and been, fine. Adjusted. How quickly he always adjusted, compared to how deeply he'd first felt things. He thought about second year, the basilisk, Ginny, the diary. How he'd trusted Dumbledore's portrait explanations without ever once thinking to ask why the headmaster wasn't available when a student was nearly killed. How reasonable it had seemed that Dumbledore had been suspended at exactly the wrong moment, and how he'd never questioned the timing. He thought about third year. Sirius. The way his rage at the man who he'd thought had betrayed his parents had burned hot for about 2 days and then settled into something manageable, something cooperative and trusting, almost before he'd made the decision to extend that trust. 2 days. He'd gone from wanting to kill a man to trusting him with his life in 2 days. He pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum, where the heat had started before the collapse. 5 years. Someone had been doing this for 5 years. Since before Hogwarts, which meant it had begun before he even knew he was a wizard, which meant it had been arranged, planned and arranged, by someone with access to a 9-year-old boy's daily intake before that boy had even arrived at school. Madame Pomfrey appeared at the door of the small office. You should sleep, she said. Tomorrow will be demanding. I know, Harry said. He got up from the floor, and something in the way he moved was already different, not bigger or more dramatic, just more deliberate, as though each action was now originating from somewhere deeper than before. Pomfrey. She paused. Thank you, he said. For not burying it. She held his gaze. There was never a version of tonight where I buried it, she said. Get to bed. And Mr. Potter, she said his name the way she always said names when she was speaking as a healer and not as a school employee. Whatever comes next, the diagnosis is documented, the specimen is preserved, and my report is already filed. You are not alone in this. Harry nodded once. He went back to the third bed from the door and lay down, and the hospital wing settled into its deep, stone-quiet dark around him, and for the first time in what he was beginning to understand was a very long time, he fell asleep without adjustment, without softening, without the chemistry of someone else's design whispering through his blood. He just slept. He woke at 7, fully, cleanly, without the usual process of hauling himself up through layers of groggy reluctance. Light was coming through the high windows in long pale bars. Someone had left a tray with breakfast on the table beside his bed, toast, eggs, pumpkin juice. He looked at the pumpkin juice for a long moment. Then he picked up the toast and left the juice alone and went to find Madame Pomfrey. She was at her desk in her office, writing, and she didn't look up when he came in. "I've left out a different glass for you," she said. "Water. The pumpkin juice in the Great Hall I will be speaking with the kitchens directly. You should know that until I have done so, I'd suggest avoiding communal beverages." Harry sat down in the chair across from her desk. "What are you writing?" "My formal statement." She kept writing. "The incident report I filed last night was medical. This is the attached testimony. I'm a witness and a diagnostician." She paused in her writing. "Snape will be asked to provide a similar statement. He was the potions master on staff for all 5 years in question. He will be asked to speak to the preparation and authorization process." "And he'll lie," Harry said. "He will attempt to manage his statement carefully," Pomfrey said, which was not the same thing as agreement but was not disagreement either. She set down her quill and looked at him. "You look better. More rested than I would have expected." "First time I've slept properly in a while," Harry said. He didn't make it dramatic. It was simply a fact. "When does Dumbledore come?" "He sent a message at 6. He'd like to speak with you at 10. She held his gaze. "As I said last night, I'll see him," Harry said. "But I want to see the diagnostic results first." "Your written results. The full scan output." Pomfrey opened a drawer in her desk and placed a folder in front of him without a word. Inside was parchment covered in diagnostic notation, the kind of complex medical shorthand that Pomfrey used for thorough cases, dense and precise, with the compound identification marks highlighted in red. Harry read it carefully. He'd never been a particularly slow reader, but the way he was reading now was different from how he'd read things before, which he only knew because he could feel the comparison. Before, there had been a kind of friction in sustained analytical focus, a tendency for attention to drift. Now the words stayed put and the analysis came clean and ordered. The diagnostic listed 5 distinct compounds. 3 were standard-grade compliance adjusters, the kind used medicinally in short doses for anxiety disorders, modified here into longer-acting variants. 1 was a loyalty modifier with a specific affinity for authority figure neural pathway reinforcement, which was a phrase that Pomfrey had underlined twice. And the 5th, the one she'd put 3 question marks beside, was something Harry didn't recognize. "What's the 5th one?" he asked. Pomfrey came around her desk to look at where his finger rested. "I've sent a specimen to St. Mungo's for identification. My best assessment based on the molecular signature is that it's a suppressor, specifically targeting magical inhibition. Not magical performance," she clarified, before he could ask. "Your spells still worked. Your powers still functioned. It suppressed the instinct for independent magical escalation. The reflex to push further, to attempt larger magic, to test limits." She paused. "Without it, I don't know what your ceiling looks like. I don't think anyone does." Harry closed the folder. He sat with that for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, "What time is it now?" 7:30. "I have 2.5 hours, he said. "I'm going to go to the library." Pomfrey blinked. "The library? I want to read about wizarding medical law as it pertains to unauthorized compound administration. And about the legal standing of a diagnostic report from a Hogwarts medical practitioner in a Wisengamot proceeding." He stood. "I want to know my ground before Dumbledore comes." She watched him for a moment, and there was something in her expression that wasn't quite professional neutrality anymore, something that might have been, if Madame Pomfrey was the sort of person whose face did things like this, a very quiet and private kind of pride. "3rd floor," she said. "Restricted legal texts are in the cabinet to the left of the door. I'll write you a note." At 9:45, Harry came back from the library. He'd filled 6 inches of parchment with notes in small, precise handwriting and he'd eaten a scone from the hospital wing tray Pomfrey had refreshed, and he sat in the chair beside his assigned bed and waited. He could hear the castle waking up around him, distant footsteps, voices, the muffled reverberations of a Saturday morning at Hogwarts. The ball would have ended hours ago. People would be sleeping in, nursing sore feet, reliving dances and disasters. Somewhere in Gryffindor Tower, Ron was probably awake and confused. Hermione was probably already researching something. He thought about them and felt the difference immediately, the way the thought arrived now without that automatic warmth layered over everything, that comfortable assumption that they were simply, fundamentally, entirely on his side. He still cared about them. But the care was complicated now, textured, asking questions. Which was probably, he thought, what caring about people actually felt like when you were doing it with a brain that belonged entirely to you. At 10:03, Dumbledore came through the hospital wing doors. He moved slowly, as he always did, that measured, deliberate pace that had the effect of making every room he entered seem like a room he'd already been standing in. He was wearing deep blue robes with stars on them, and his half-moon glasses, and the long silver beard, and the expression of a man approaching something painful with the full weight of his experience. He pulled a chair up and sat down across from Harry's bed and looked at him. "Harry," he said. "Headmaster," Harry said. The word landed differently than it usually did. Not disrespectfully, but not with the warmth that had always been underneath it before. Just the word, clean, at proper distance. Something moved in Dumbledore's eyes. He registered it. Of course he did. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Differently than usual," Harry said. "You know why?" Dumbledore laced his fingers together. "I would like to explain. I've asked Madame Pomfrey to sit in," Harry said. "If that's all right." The pause was brief but present. "Of course," Dumbledore said. Pomfrey came out of her office and positioned herself near the door, arms folded, wearing the face she'd been wearing since last night, that one that said she was watching and remembering. Harry looked at Dumbledore. "You can explain," he said. "I'll listen." And Dumbledore began, in that careful, resonant voice of his, to try to explain why you might consider it necessary to spend 5 years quietly dismantling a child's autonomy for the greater good, and the explanation was exactly as intelligent and as compassionate and as completely, irredeemably wrong as Harry had spent the last 2.5 hours in the library preparing to hear. He listened to every word. He took a few notes. And when Dumbledore finished, Harry looked up from his parchment with the clear, steady gaze of someone who had just, finally, irreversibly, against every compound and contrivance, become himself. "I see," Harry said. "Harry, thank you for explaining." He capped his quill. "I'll be in touch." He stood up. He walked to the window and looked out over the grounds, the lake dark and still under a white December sky, the forest in its winter silence, the Quidditch pitch with its frost-stiffened grass. Hogwarts spread out below him, familiar and foreign simultaneously, the way places looked when you saw them with new eyes. Behind him, Dumbledore rose slowly from his chair. Harry didn't turn around. He heard the headmaster's footsteps cross the ward. He heard the door open. He heard it close. Then he stood at the window in the quiet hospital wing and breathed, and the air tasted clean and sharp and entirely, uncompromisingly real. Chapter 2, The Shape of the Cage. The paper trail started with a potions order from September 1989. Pomfrey found it on Sunday morning, 48 hours after the collapse, buried inside a requisition ledger that had been misfiled under miscellaneous student health supplements, which was not, as it happened, an actual category in the Hogwarts medical supply system. Someone had created it specifically. Someone who understood filing systems well enough to know that a misfiled document was far more invisible than a destroyed one, because destroyed documents created questions and misfiled ones just disappeared. She brought it to Harry after breakfast, set it on the bed beside him without ceremony, and let him read it. The order was for a base compound. Neutral, medical grade, the kind of thing a school might legitimately stock for specific cases of student anxiety or adjustment disorders. The quantity ordered was unremarkable, 2 months' supply. The signature at the bottom was Severus Snape's. The authorization above it, in a different hand, different ink, was Dumbledore's. Harry read it twice, carefully. Then he set it down and looked at Pomfrey. "There'll be more," he said. "I've been in the filing room since 6, she said. "I found 7 so far. I expect there are more under different classifications. Someone was thorough, but they were also working within a system they didn't design, so the seams show if you look at the right angles." "Can I see all of them?" She put a folder on the bed. 7 requisition forms, 7 years' worth of supply orders, each signed by Snape, each authorized above that by Dumbledore, each misfiled in a subcategory that didn't exist in the standard Hogwarts administrative system. The quantities scaled upward over time, year 1 relatively light, year 3 substantially heavier, as though the dosage had been adjusted to compensate for something. Harry knew what it had been compensating for. He was 14. He was physically larger than he'd been at 9. And he suspected, though he didn't say this aloud, that the natural resistance of his magical core to external interference had been growing alongside him, requiring increasing dosage to maintain the same effect. The 5th compound, the magical inhibition suppressor, appeared for the first time in the 3rd year's orders. He looked at that for a while. "I need copies of all of these," he said. "Not originals. I want the originals kept somewhere Dumbledore cannot access them." "They're currently in a lockbox in my private office," Pomfrey said. "The key is with me. I intend to deliver them to the Board of Governors directly on Monday morning. Not the Ministry first. The Board has jurisdiction over internal Hogwarts administration. The Ministry will enter through them." She paused. "Unless you would prefer to accelerate the process." Harry considered this. "Has Sirius heard back from Amelia Bones?" "A letter arrived for you this morning." She produced it from her pocket. It was sealed with Sirius's mark, the same mark he'd used in 3rd year, the irregular scratched star that meant "This is genuinely for me and I haven't been intercepted." Harry broke it open. Sirius's handwriting was the hurried, forward-leaning kind that suggested a man writing fast. "Remus knows everything. Bones received my owl." She sent back a single line asking for the diagnostic report and specimen analysis. Then, below that, underlined, she said if Pomfrey's report confirms what I described, she can have an investigator at Hogwarts by Tuesday. Don't let anyone administer anything to you. Don't sign anything Dumbledore puts in front of you. And Harry, eat properly. Mooney says your blood chemistry needs support right now. Actual food, not whatever you've been surviving on." Something loosened slightly in Harry's chest. Not much. But enough. At the bottom, in smaller writing, "I'm proud of you for the way you're handling this. Your father would have burned the school down by now. Your mother would have done exactly what you're doing. Make her proud." He folded the letter and put it inside the folder with the requisition forms. "Tell me how to get the diagnostic report and specimen to Amelia Bones today," he said. Getting anything out of Hogwarts quietly on a Sunday was a matter of understanding which moving parts could be trusted and which couldn't. Pomfrey solved the problem with characteristic efficiency. She had a standing arrangement with a medical courier owl, separate from the school owl post, used for sending specimens to St. Mungo's for secondary analysis. It was a system entirely within her professional purview and entirely outside Dumbledore's oversight. By noon, the specimen and a certified copy of the diagnostic report were on their way to Amelia Bones's office at the Ministry. By 1 in the afternoon, Harry had showered, changed into his own clothes, and discharged himself from the hospital wing over Pomfrey's mild objection that he should rest another day. He told her he was rested, which was true, and that he had things to do, which was also true, and she gave him a small phial of a pale blue restorative that she told him to take with dinner and let him go. He went to the library. Not to research this time. He had a letter to write. He found a corner table in the back section, behind the charms reference stacks where it was quiet and the afternoon light came in at a low angle and turned everything amber. He spread out a piece of parchment, dipped his quill, and thought for a moment about what he wanted to say and, more importantly, what he didn't. He wrote to Neville Longbottom first. This surprised even him a little, but the logic was clean. Neville had a grandmother who was a formidable figure in wizarding society, well-connected and deeply invested in both the legal and political structures of wizarding Britain. Augusta Longbottom had been pushing for ministry accountability since Frank and Alice had been tortured into incapacity. She understood the Wisengamot, she understood how institutions protected themselves, and she had personal reasons to care about whether powerful people were held responsible for damage done to vulnerable ones. He didn't tell Neville everything. He told him enough, that he'd been medically compromised, that there were legal proceedings beginning, that he wondered if Neville's grandmother might be interested in the case from a precedent-setting perspective. He kept the tone casual and the subtext obvious. Neville was shrewder than people gave him credit for, he'd read between the lines without any help. Then he wrote to Cedric. This one was shorter and more direct. I'd like to talk. Not about the tournament. Something else. Can you find a time this week? That was it. Cedric was the kind of person who would respond to directness with directness, and Harry had a feeling about him, a specific, unfiltered instinct that told him Cedric Diggory was both trustworthy and more practically useful than he'd previously seemed. He was sealing the second letter when someone sat down across from him. He looked up. Hermione Granger's eyes were red around the edges in the way that indicated she'd been awake for most of the night and had spent a portion of it crying, though she was not currently crying, and her jaw was set with the particular determination of someone who had made a decision and arrived to enforce it. I've been looking for you since yesterday morning, she said. They said you discharged yourself from the hospital wing an hour ago. I went to the tower, you weren't there. I tried the pitch, I tried the grounds. She stopped. Pressed her lips together. Are you all right? Genuinely. Not fine, are you actually all right? Harry looked at her. The instinct to immediately reassure her, yes, don't worry, it's nothing, honestly, was there, but it was different now, slowed down enough to examine. He could see it as an option rather than an automatic response. No, he said honestly. I'm not all right. I'm functional and I'm doing something about it, which is different from all right. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her face that was complicated and worth watching. The rumor going around is that you had a medical episode. Neville said he heard someone say you collapsed because of something in your bloodstream, but nobody seems to know what. She paused. Ron says it was probably magical exhaustion from the first task. Ron is wrong, Harry said. She looked at him carefully. What was it? He considered telling her right then, the full version, and decided against it, not out of distrust, but out of a recognition that he wanted to choose his ground carefully, and he hadn't decided yet what Hermione's ground was. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because he was aware that her instinct in any complicated moral situation was to align herself with authority structures she trusted, and she trusted Dumbledore quite nearly as much as she trusted him before. Perhaps more, if he was being honest. I'll tell you everything, he said. Soon. There are things I need to do first, and then I'll tell you. He paused. When I do, I need you to try to hear it the way you'd hear evidence. Not the way you'd hear something that needed immediately fixing or defending. She frowned. What does that mean? It means I'm asking you to listen before you start trying to solve it. He looked at her steadily. Can you do that? I always listen, Hermione. He said her name quietly, and something in the way he said it, different, weightier, without the old apologetic softness, stopped her. I'm asking you to do something specific. Not because I doubt your intelligence. Because I need to know whether you can receive difficult information about someone you respect and sit with it before you react. The silence stretched. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before, a mixture of affronted and genuinely unsettled. You're different, she said. Yes. Since the collapse. Yes. She looked down at the table between them. Then back up. Is what happened to you serious, she asked, and there was something stripped back in her voice now, something less armored. I mean really serious. Not Hogwarts serious. Actually serious. Yes, he said. Actually seriously serious. She reached across the table and put her hand over his briefly, quick, warm, uncharacteristic in its simplicity. Okay, she said. I'll try to listen the way you're asking. She withdrew her hand. Is there anything I can do right now? Today? He thought about it. Yes, actually. I need someone to check something in Hogwarts, a history for me. There's a section on the administrative charter, specifically the clauses governing student welfare and the limits of headmaster authority during term. I need the specific language. She blinked. Then she reached into her bag, which was sitting in her lap, and produced Hogwarts, a history with the particular expression of someone who had been prepared for this specific eventuality. I have it with me. Despite everything, something warm and genuine moved through Harry's chest. Some things, at least, were simply and uncomplicatedly themselves. Page 412, she said, already opening it. I was actually reading it last night, funnily enough. The welfare charter section. She looked up at him. I started reading it when I heard you'd collapsed. He took the book when she offered it and read the page she had marked. The Administrative Charter of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, as ratified by the Board of Governors in 1892 and amended 3 times since, was clear on one significant point: the authority of the headmaster extended over educational and disciplinary matters within the school grounds. It did not, in the specific and unambiguous language of the 1947 amendment, extend to medical decisions about students, which fell under the sovereign authority of the school healer. More importantly, subsection 7, c, of the welfare provisions stated that any student who believed their health had been compromised by an action originating within the school had the right to request an independent inquiry conducted by parties outside the school's direct governance. Harry folded that information up neatly and put it away in the part of his brain he'd been organizing since Friday night. Thank you, he said. Harry. She was watching him. Are you going to be all right in the tournament? The second task is in February. That's 2 months. He looked at her. I'm going to be better in the tournament than I've ever been, he said. It was simply a fact, delivered as one. She seemed to be deciding whether to believe him. Ron appeared at the end of the aisle. Ron Weasley looked the way he always looked when something had happened that he hadn't been present for and felt he should have been, a combination of slightly wounded and aggressively nonchalant that he deployed as a defense mechanism with the subtlety of a beater's bat. There you are, he said, dropping into the chair beside Hermione. Madame Pomfrey wouldn't let anyone in yesterday, and then this morning, he gestured vaguely. George said he heard Dumbledore came to see you. Is everything all right? Harry looked at Ron. He'd been thinking about this, about Ron, since Friday night. Not with anger. With something more precise than that. He'd been turning over specific memories, Ron's reactions at key moments, the patterns in his support, the particular inconsistency of a friend who had abandoned him over the Goblet of Fire entry but sat next to him at every meal and always came back. Always. He wasn't reaching a verdict. He was just looking clearly at things he'd previously looked at through a filter. Not really, Harry said, giving Ron the same honest answer he'd given Hermione. But I'm dealing with it. What happened? The collapse, I mean. Seamus is saying you were poisoned. Not poisoned exactly. Harry paused. Something like that, but longer running. Ron stared. What does that mean? It means he'll explain when he's ready, Hermione said, in a tone that suggested this had already been established. Ron looked between them with the slightly lost expression of someone who had arrived in the middle of a conversation that had already developed its own grammar. Right, he said slowly. Right. Well. If there's anything you need, there is actually, Harry said. Ron blinked. He'd probably been expecting reassurance. Okay. What? Think back over the last 3 years, Harry said. Every time you've been in a situation where you could have, or thought about, going to one of the professors or your parents about something involving me. Not about me being in danger, but about something you thought was odd. A behavior, a reaction, something that seemed off. Have you ever had a moment like that? Ron was very still. It was interesting, Harry thought. The question was open and non-accusatory, and Ron had gone completely still, as though he'd been asked to put his hands where Harry could see them. Why are you asking that? Ron said carefully. Because you know me better than most people, Harry said. 3 years at close range. I'm asking whether anything ever seemed strange to you about how I responded to things. Ron looked at the table. Something was moving behind his eyes that was the specific motion of a person deciding how honest to be. You always seemed very, okay, he said finally. About things that should have messed you up more. Like, the Philosopher's Stone, going down there at the end of first year, you came back and within 2 days you were just, sorted. And the basilisk. And Pettigrew. He paused. I thought you were just brave, like it rolled off you. It didn't roll off me, Harry said. I just stopped being bothered faster than made sense. Ron was quiet. What else? Harry asked. You never, Ron started again. You never got properly angry at Dumbledore. For anything. Even when things, like when he let Snape keep treating you like that for 3 years, you'd get angry at Snape and then sort of, let go of it, any frustration at Dumbledore. Like it didn't stick. He looked up. I thought it was because you respected him so much. That you'd worked through why he made the choices he made. What if I told you, Harry said carefully, that I hadn't worked through it? That the feeling just went away. The silence in the library was very complete. Ron's expression was cycling through things, understanding, discomfort, something that looked uncomfortably like guilt, then the blankness people put on when they're in the process of not examining something they don't want to examine. Ron, Harry said quietly. Your mum is friendly with Dumbledore. Your family, I know what my family is, Ron said, and his voice had an edge in it that was defensive and real and honest. I'm not saying you knew, Harry said. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking whether there were moments, and there were, and I think you knew that what I'm describing means those moments mean something. Ron stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back. I need to think, he said. He wasn't angry, or rather, he was, but it wasn't at Harry, and he knew it wasn't at Harry, and the specific misery of that was clear on his face. I'm not going anywhere. I just need to think. He left. Harry watched him go. Hermione was looking at her hands. That was harder than it needed to be, she said quietly. Was it? Harry asked, genuinely. She didn't answer immediately. What are you going to do? She asked instead. Practically. What are the actual steps? Amelia Bones receives the report today. An investigator should be at Hogwarts by Tuesday. The Board of Governors gets the original documentation Monday morning. In the meantime, I have the tournament to deal with, the second task is February. He paused. And Dumbledore is going to try to get to me before the investigator arrives. He'll want to frame the narrative. He'll say he had reasons, Hermione said. And from the way she said it, Harry could tell she was already working through what those reasons might be, building the case for the defense even as she was sitting on his side of it. He does have reasons, Harry said. That's what makes it complicated. He genuinely believes Voldemort is going to return and that I'm the only person positioned to stop it, and he made a calculation about how much of my autonomy was acceptable collateral damage in service of that goal. He looked at her. The fact that he might be right about the first part doesn't make the second part defensible. Something shifted in Hermione's expression, the specific shift of a person encountering an argument they cannot immediately dismantle. No, she said slowly. No, it doesn't, does it? Monday arrived the way significant days always arrived at Hogwarts, which was with complete indifference to their significance. Breakfast was the same as every breakfast, the enchanted ceiling the same flat gray of early winter, the noise and motion of several hundred students navigating the start of a school week all moving at its usual pace. Harry came down to breakfast from his dormitory at 7:15 and sat in his usual spot and poured himself a glass of water from the jug on the table. Not the communal pumpkin juice. Water. Nobody noticed or commented, because nobody was watching him closely enough to notice the absence of pumpkin juice from his typical breakfast, which was itself a moderately interesting observation. Neville sat down across from him. He was carrying a letter. "Got a reply from Gran," he said, setting it in front of Harry. "She replied within an hour. I don't think she slept." He paused. "Harry, she wants to know if she can come to Hogwarts." Harry read Augusta Longbottom's letter. It was handwritten on stiff, formal parchment in a strong, angular script. "I have been waiting for something like this for 11 years. I will not discuss my reasons by owl. I request a meeting at Hogsmeade at the earliest opportunity, and I will arrange my own transport. Tell the boy I expect him to look me in the eye when we speak. There was a P.S., tell him also that Frank would have liked him very much." Harry refolded the letter. "Tell her Thursday afternoon," he said. 3:00, Hogsmeade. I'll get a permission slip from Pomfrey." He looked at Neville. "She's been waiting 11 years. What's she been waiting for?" Neville was quiet for a moment. "For someone to make the people who hurt my parents accountable," he said simply. "She thinks Dumbledore has protected certain people for too long." Harry nodded once and went back to his toast. At the other end of the Gryffindor table, Ron was eating in silence, staring at his plate. He'd come back to the dormitory on Sunday night late, after Harry had already been asleep, and he hadn't said anything in the morning beyond a brief nod. Harry let it sit. Ron needed to do whatever he needed to do and crowding him would only calcify it. Halfway through breakfast, the owl post arrived. Among the 100 fluttering wings dropping letters and packages across the hall, one owl went straight to the head table, a crisp grey bird Harry didn't recognize, carrying a sealed letter with the ministry insignia on it. It landed in front of Dumbledore. Harry watched Dumbledore open it and read it and watched his expression not change, which was more telling than if it had. Then Dumbledore looked up and met Harry's gaze across the length of the great hall. Harry held it. It was perhaps 5 seconds. Then Dumbledore looked back down at his breakfast, and Harry went back to his toast, and neither of them looked away second. Across the hall, Hermione had seen the exchange. She caught Harry's eye and raised her eyebrows slightly. "The ministry?" Harry gave a small nod. She looked at her plate and nodded once, and he could see her processing it in the particular way she processed all information, cataloging, ordering, connecting to adjacent data. She'd have read Hogwarts, a history 3 more times by tomorrow. He was counting on it. After breakfast, Professor McGonagall intercepted him in the corridor outside the Great Hall. She was wearing an expression that was the composite of several contradictory things: professional composure, personal distress, and the look of a woman who was doing her absolute level best and finding it insufficient. She stopped him with a hand on his shoulder and steered him gently to one side of the corridor while students streamed past. "Mr. Potter," she said. Her voice was very low and very precise. "I want you to know that I have spoken with Madame Pomfrey. I am aware of what the diagnostic found." She stopped. Harry waited. "I want you to know," she said again, and there was something happening in her voice that she was clearly working to manage, that I did not know. "I want to be absolutely clear about that. I did not know, and I would not have." She stopped again. Set her jaw. "I'm sorry. That is, I am deeply sorry." Harry looked at her. The apology was real. He could feel the difference between a real apology and a managed one, and this was real in the way that McGonagall was real, without softness, without performance, just the hard clean thing itself delivered straight. "I know you didn't know," he said. "I've thought about it and it doesn't fit your character. You would have stopped it. Something moved through her face at that. I should have seen, you weren't looking for it, he said. Nobody was. It was designed so that nobody would look. He paused. The investigator from the ministry arrives tomorrow. I'd like to know that you'll be available to give a statement if asked. Without hesitation, she said immediately. Good. He nodded. Can I ask something? Of course. What Snape said. To you, to anyone. In the last 2 days. McGonagall's expression did something complex. Nothing, she said. He's been completely silent since Saturday morning, when the headmaster spoke with the staff. He attended Sunday breakfast and dinner, did not speak, and has been in his office since. He cancelled Monday morning potions lessons. She paused. In 30 years, I have never seen Severus Snape cancel a lesson. Harry thought about that. Snape cancelling lessons was, in its way, more informative than anything Snape might have said. Thank you, he said. Professor, I might need your help navigating some of this. Not the legal side, but the school side. The day-to-day. Someone I can trust to tell me if something's happening around me that I should know about. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone taking a proper measurement of a person they thought they already knew. You have that, she said. Unequivocally and unconditionally. He found Snape. This was not an accident. He'd decided on Sunday evening, after thinking about it at length, that Snape was a problem that required direct engagement rather than avoidance. Snape knew the most. Snape's silence was strategic, and it was also fragile in a specific way that Harry had only understood once the chemical filter on his perception had been lifted. Snape was not comfortable with what had happened. Not comfortable at all. He knocked on the door of the potions office at 4:15 on Monday afternoon. The corridor was empty, everyone was in their common rooms or at study, and the dungeons at this hour had the cold, echoey quality of somewhere properly alone. The door opened. Snape looked at him the way he always looked at Harry, but without the usual certainty. The contempt was present, but it was wearing the face of something else underneath it, something Harry would have missed a week ago and couldn't miss now. Mr. Potter, Snape said. Professor, Harry said. I'd like to speak with you. I have nothing to, you knew, Harry said, pleasantly. You prepared the compounds. Your signature is on the requisition forms. There are 7 of them. I've seen them. Snape was very still. I'm not here to threaten you, Harry said. I'm telling you that I know, because I think you deserve to know I know, and because what you do with that information in the next 48 hours is going to matter a great deal. He paused. The ministry investigator arrives tomorrow. They'll want a statement from the potions master who was on staff for all 5 years the compounds were administered. You have no idea, Snape said, and his voice was lower and more carefully controlled than Harry had ever heard it, what the considerations were. You're right, Harry said. I don't. But I'm also not the one whose name is on the documentation. He looked at Snape steadily. I'm going to tell you something and I want you to hear it properly. I don't want to destroy you. I'm not interested in destruction for its own sake. If you were acting under direction, under pressure, under coercion, that context matters legally and I'd want it to be part of the record. Snape stared at him. But, Harry continued, if you stay silent and let the investigator work from the documentation alone, the documentation says what it says and there's no context. Just your signature. The dungeon corridor was cold and very quiet. Why, Snape said finally, slowly, would you extend that consideration to me? Because you've also been used, Harry said. By the same person. For longer. He let that sit for a moment. I think you know that. I think you've known it for a long time and it's part of why this particular thing, what was done to me, part of why you're the one who's cancelled their lessons. Something happened in Snape's face that Harry had never seen happen there before. It was not a crack. It was more like the expression of a man who has just had a key piece of the architecture of his self-narrative quietly and precisely removed. "Go back to your dormitory, Potter," Snape said. "Of course," Harry said. He stepped back. "Think about what I said." He walked away down the dungeon corridor and didn't look back, and behind him he could feel Snape standing in the doorway of the potions office watching him go with an expression that Harry couldn't see but could somehow feel entirely, the expression of a man rethinking everything. Tuesday arrived with an owl. It landed on the Gryffindor table at breakfast with the kind of authoritative thump that only owls carrying official ministry correspondence ever quite achieved, and it was carrying a small sealed note addressed to Harry in crisp, square handwriting. He opened it. "Mr. Potter. I am Investigator Gideon Calder, assigned by Director Bones to the matter referenced in the diagnostic report received Sunday. I will be at Hogwarts at 10 this morning. I would appreciate your availability at that time. If there is somewhere within the school you would prefer to meet other than Headmaster Dumbledore's office, please let the bearer know. G. Calder, Ministry of Magic, Department of Magical Law Enforcement." Harry read it, folded it, and sent the owl back with a one-line note, "Hospital Wing. Madame Pomfrey's office. 10 o'clock. He looked up. Ron was watching him from 3 seats down. Their eyes met. Ron's jaw was set in the way it got when he decided something that cost him something. "I told Mum," Ron said. His voice was low enough that only Harry heard it. "Last night. By owl. I told her I'd heard something about what happened to you and I asked her directly if she knew anything." He paused. She didn't reply. Harry held his gaze. "How long since you sent it?" 12 hours. "She always replies to your letters," Harry said quietly. Ron looked at the table. "Yeah," he said. "She does." The silence between them was full of something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. It was the specific weight of understanding something you'd been not understanding for a very long time. Harry reached across and gripped Ron's shoulder briefly, the way Sirius had taught him to, not soft, not performative, the grip of one person acknowledging another person's weight. "Thank you," Harry said. "For asking." Ron nodded once and went back to his breakfast and didn't say anything else, and Harry thought that this, the asking even when the answer was terrifying, was the most honest thing Ron Weasley had done in the 3 years of their friendship. It was more than enough. Gideon Calder was younger than Harry expected, mid-30s, with an investigator's economy of movement and the particular quality of attention that meant he was absorbing everything in a room simultaneously and filing it in categories. He had a plain face that was easy to underestimate, which Harry suspected was professionally useful. He shook Harry's hand and sat down in Pomfrey's office, set a small recording device on the table, and said, "I want to be clear before we begin, Mr. Potter. Director Bones asked me to tell you that you are not under investigation. You are the subject of a welfare inquiry. The distinction is important. You are not required to answer any question I ask, and you may stop at any time." "I understand," Harry said. "I'm happy to answer everything." Calder looked at him steadily. "You've been remarkably composed about this," he said. "Most people in your position would be angrier." Harry said. "I was going to say less organized." Harry almost smiled. "I had 72 hours in a hospital wing and not much else to do," he said. Organizing seemed like the useful option. Calder pulled out a folder. "Let's start from the diagnostic. Walk me through Friday night from your perspective." So Harry walked him through it. The collapse. Waking up. Pomfrey's explanation. The requisition forms. The letters to Sirius. The conversation with Dumbledore. He was precise and chronological and he did not editorialize. He gave Calder the folder of copied documentation, which Calder went through page by page with a face that was professionally neutral and eyes that were doing rapid, intense work. When Harry was finished, Calder looked up. "The headmaster told you, your words, that what was done was never intended to harm you and that the considerations were significant. Yes. Did he offer a specific justification? He spoke at length about the danger posed by Voldemort's potential return and about his responsibility to ensure that his word was prepared. Harry paused. He said that prepared in this context meant compliant enough to remain within a system of protection. Calder wrote something down. And the fifth compound, the magical suppressor. He addressed that. He didn't specifically address the fifth compound, Harry said. I didn't ask him about it directly during that conversation. I didn't want to show him everything I knew. Calder looked up again. This time the professional neutrality had something behind it. Smart, he said simply. I've been told I'm smarter than I appear, Harry said. By whom? By the person who was chemically suppressing my intellectual initiative for 5 years. He said it without venom. Just the fact, with its particular irony sitting on top of it like a paperweight. I've been wondering what the gap looks like. Calder studied him for a long moment. Mr. Potter, he said, I have been doing this job for 9 years. I have worked on cases involving controlled compounds, illegal potions, medical misconduct, and 4 separate cases involving illegal use of compulsion. In 9 years, I have never had the subject of an inquiry conduct their own preliminary document recovery, independently contact appropriate legal and political allies, arrange their own independent legal consultation, and show up to the investigator interview with a complete folder of evidence already organized in chronological order. He paused. Just so we're both clear on what kind of person we're dealing with here. Harry looked at him. Is that relevant to the investigation? It's relevant to the magnitude of what was suppressed, Calder said. He opened his folder again. Now. Tell me about Snape. Harry told him. And the morning moved forward, and somewhere above them in the school, in the headmaster's office, Albus Dumbledore was sitting very still in front of a fire and doing what Harry suspected he did better than almost anyone alive. He was waiting, patiently, for the situation to rearrange itself into something he could shape. Harry intended to move faster than that. Chapter 3, What Friends Are Made of. The thing about Hogwarts was that it could not keep a secret. It tried. The castle had 1,000 moving parts, staircases that rearranged themselves, portraits that turned their backs, walls that opened and closed on no discernible logic, and all of those moving parts were technically in service of discretion. But the student body was 400 teenagers with nothing better to do than watch each other, and ministry investigators arriving at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday did not go unnoticed regardless of which entrance they used. By lunch, the rumor had developed several competing versions. Version 1, Harry Potter had been poisoned by someone connected to the Dark Lord, and the ministry was here to investigate an assassination attempt. Version 2, Harry Potter had been poisoning himself, something to do with the tournament, with an edge, with cheating, and the ministry was here to disqualify him. Version 3, which was the version circulating primarily among the Slytherin table with the particular enthusiasm of people who enjoyed complicated stories, Harry Potter had been poisoned by Dumbledore, the ministry was here to arrest the headmaster, and everything everyone had ever taken for granted about Hogwarts was about to be dismantled. Version 3 was the closest to accurate, which said something either about the Slytherin talent for political intelligence or the general transparency of the situation, depending on how you looked at it. Harry ate lunch quietly and let the noise happen around him. He'd finished with Calder at noon, 3 hours that had covered every angle of the diagnostic, the documentation, and the broader context of his time at Hogwarts, and he'd come down to the Great Hall with the particular tiredness of someone who has been intensely focused for a long time and needs food before anything else. He was halfway through a bowl of soup when Fleur Delacour sat down next to him. Not across from him. Next to him, on the Gryffindor bench, with the complete confidence of someone who had decided that social conventions about house tables were other people's problem. She put her own lunch in front of her and said, without preamble, "I saw you collapse on Friday night." Harry looked at her. Most of the Great Hall did. Most of the Great Hall went back to their conversations within 20 minutes, she said. I didn't. Her English was excellent, the accent was there, French and precise, but the vocabulary was careful and the grammar exact. The way you fell, I've seen that specific collapse before. My grandfather. He was an Auror. He was kept on a compliance compound for 6 months by a ministry official who wanted him to overlook certain activities. She paused and picked up her fork with complete composure. He collapsed the same way when his body finally rejected it. Harry set down his spoon. He looked at her properly, the way he was learning to look at people now, without the filter that made everyone in authority seem broadly trustworthy and everyone else vaguely peripheral. Fleur Delacour was, he thought, significantly more than she was given credit for being. The Beauxbatons students had been received at Hogwarts with the particular brand of British appreciation that was really just condescension dressed up in admiration, and Fleur had been the most visible target of it, because she was beautiful and because she seemed to know it, and because people found that combination irritating. What they'd been missing, Harry thought, was that she was also watching everything with the attentiveness of someone accustomed to being underestimated in rooms where things were being decided. Who was the ministry official? He asked. He was removed, she said. Eventually. After considerable maneuvering. She used the French word first, then caught herself and used the English. My grandmother was the one who forced the inquiry. She was not a woman who accepted eventually as an answer. She paused. I am telling you this because I think you should know you're not the first, and I think you should know that the maneuvering is the important part. What kind of maneuvering? The kind where you do not wait for people to be honest, she said. You create conditions where honesty is the only option left to them. You close every other door before you knock on the one you want opened. She looked at him sidelong. You already know this. I can see it. I'm learning it, Harry said. She made a small sound that might have been approval. The second task, she said, shifting register entirely, smooth as a key turning. You know what it is? Not yet. Neither do I, she said, though from her tone he wasn't entirely sure that was true. But I've been watching the lake since we arrived and I think the answer is in there. The egg sounds like it's underwater, Harry said. She nodded. So we need to breathe underwater for, how long, do you think? An hour, at least. The clue says an hour. There are several approaches, she said. None of them simple. I've been researching since October. She looked at him. You've been researching since? Since this morning, Harry said. When I stopped having other things to do. Something moved in her face that was almost a smile. You collapsed on Friday and you're doing tournament research by Tuesday. The tournament doesn't care about my personal situation. No, she agreed. It doesn't. She stood, collecting her things with the fluid efficiency of someone who never wasted motion. I'm in the library after dinner. If you want to compare research. She said it neutrally, as an offer that was neither pressing nor indifferent. Harry looked at her. I'll be there. She walked back to the Beauxbatons table without looking back, and Harry watched her go and thought that of all the unexpected developments of the last 4 days, Fleur Delacour treating him like an equal was possibly the one he found most straightforwardly pleasant. The fallout, when it properly arrived in the form of an owl at 2 in the afternoon. Harry was in the corridor outside Transfiguration when Pigwidgeon found him, Ron's tiny owl, completely hysterical as always, zooming at his head like a feathered missile. He caught the letter before Pig could drop it somewhere unhelpful and unrolled it. It was from Molly Weasley. It was 3 pages long. The first page was about Harry's health, warm, maternal, deeply concerned, with specific references to proper meals and rest and whether Madame Pomfrey had been adequately attentive. The second page was about the tournament and how brave he was and how proud everyone was. And the third page, which was in slightly smaller writing as though it had been added under pressure of a different kind, was about Dumbledore. I know there are things being said at school right now, Harry dear, and I want you to know that whatever confusion has arisen, Albus Dumbledore is a great man who has dedicated his life to protecting the wizarding world and most especially to protecting you. I know sometimes his methods can seem strange, but I hope very much that you'll speak with him directly and openly before taking any actions that can't be undone. He loves you very much in his way, and so do we. Harry read it twice, particularly the third page. Then he folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Ron was waiting outside the Transfiguration classroom door, watching him. She replied, Harry said. Yeah. Ron's voice was flat. I got the same letter. Basically. Harry looked at him. Ron, I don't want to talk about what it means yet, Ron said, and his voice was honest about how much that was costing him. I'm not defending her or him. I just need a minute before I talk about what it means. Okay, Harry said. But I'm on your side. He said it roughly, like he was pushing it out from somewhere it had gotten stuck. Whatever else, that's clear. Harry nodded. The door opened and McGonagall's voice drifted out reminding them to come in before she started without them, and they went in together and sat down, and for the next 50 minutes they learned to transfigure water into glass, and Harry did it on the third attempt while most of the class was still on their first, and the quiet satisfaction of a spell working cleanly without any internal suppression telling him not to push. That was something new. McGonagall noticed. She looked at his completed work without comment, then at him briefly, then went back to the rest of the class. He saw her jaw set with something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite fury but lived somewhere between them. Hermione was waiting in the common room when Harry came in after dinner. She had books. This was not surprising, Hermione always had books, but the specific books were interesting. She had Hogwarts, a history open, which she'd clearly been through twice since Sunday based on the number of bookmarks. She had a thin volume called Wizarding Medical Law, a practitioner's guide in 3rd edition. And she had a handwritten list of notes that covered 2 full rolls of parchment. She looked up when he came in and her expression was the one she wore when she had done work she was confident in and was deciding how to present it. Sit down, she said. He sat. The common room was reasonably populated, people were doing homework, playing chess, existing at the comfortable volume of a Tuesday evening, but they were in a corner, and nobody was nearby. I've been through the welfare charter 3 more times, she said. You were right about subsection 7, c. But there's also a provision in the 1962 amendment, which nobody talks about because it was passed specifically in response to a case that was then sealed by the ministry, that gives a student who has been medically compromised within a school the right to appoint an independent advocate. Not a parent or guardian. An independent advocate, which is a specific legal designation meaning someone who acts solely in the student's interest with no conflicting institutional loyalties. She pushed a page of notes across to him. That person can attend all official proceedings related to the student's case, including Board of Governors meetings and ministry inquiries. They can access records, they can speak on the student's behalf, and they cannot be excluded by the school administration. Harry read the notes. Sirius, he said immediately. He's technically a fugitive, Hermione said carefully. He's a wrongfully imprisoned fugitive who was never given a trial. Which is itself a legal irregularity. Harry looked at her. If the case reopens, and with everything happening, there's an argument for it, he becomes a free man with clean legal standing before any of this goes to the Wisengamot. Hermione's eyes were doing the thing where she was running through several chains of logic simultaneously. You've thought about this. I've thought about a lot of things in the last 4 days. Amelia Bones, she said. She could reopen Sirius's case. Yes. And if Dumbledore was the one who ensured Sirius was never given a trial, she stopped. Picked up her quill. Do we have evidence of that? Not yet, Harry said. But we know Dumbledore was chief warlock of the Wisengamot in 1981 when Sirius was sent to Azkaban. The chief warlock has oversight over prisoner hearings. If Sirius was denied a trial, someone with that authority either authorized the denial or failed to prevent it. He paused. Both of those things are significant. Hermione was writing fast. Harry waited. How do you feel about all this? She asked, without looking up. Not strategically. Actually. He thought about it honestly. Angry, he said. But the anger is clean. It's not the kind that makes you stupid, it's more like fuel. You didn't feel this kind of angry before, she said quietly. Not about big things. You'd get angry about small things, Snape, Draco, but about large things, things that should have warranted large anger, you were always, measured. Managed, Harry said. There's a difference. She looked up from her parchment. I want to say something and I need you to not take it the wrong way. Go ahead. I followed Dumbledore's guidance on a number of things over the last 3 years, she said. Not because anyone asked me to. Because I trusted his judgment and because the evidence seemed to support trusting his judgment. She paused. I talked you out of things sometimes. When you wanted to go to a professor or push back on something and I said to wait, to trust the process, to let the adults handle it. She looked at him directly. I don't know how much of that was my own assessment and how much of it was influenced by the general atmosphere he cultivated. I don't know if I was independently reinforcing the same compliance he was chemically enforcing in you. The common room fire crackled. Someone across the room burst out laughing at a chess move. You're not responsible for what was done to me, Harry said. I know that, she said. I'm saying I might be responsible for my own choices within it. That's a different question, he agreed. And a fair one. I don't have an answer for you. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said, with a sharpness that was Hermione at her most genuine, refusing to make things comfortable. I'm telling you that I see it. So you know I see it. Harry looked at her. She was, he thought, one of the most rigorously honest people he'd ever encountered, which was both her greatest quality and the thing that sometimes made her the hardest person to be friends with. Because Hermione's honesty cut in all directions, including inward, and she never seemed to look away from what the inward cut found. I know you see it, he said. That's enough. She nodded once, briskly, and went back to her notes. The independent advocate provision, she said. I'll draft the formal application. We can file it alongside the Board of Governors documentation. I also need to file something at the Ministry about Sirius, Harry said. I'll research the petition process tonight. Hermione. She looked up. Thank you, he said, and meant it without qualification. Obviously, she said, and went back to writing. The library was quiet after dinner in the way it only got on weekday evenings, a working quiet, studious and purposeful, punctuated by the turning of pages and the occasional whispered exchange. Harry found a table near the window that looked out over the dark grounds and was already spreading out his notes when Fleur arrived. She came in carrying 2 books and a notebook, set them down with the economy of motion that seemed to characterize everything she did, and sat across from him. She looked at his notes and he looked at her books, and for a few minutes they worked in parallel without speaking, which was comfortable in the specific way that working alongside someone who is also genuinely working was always comfortable. Gillyweed, she said eventually. Harry looked up. It's a plant. It grows in the Mediterranean and in certain areas of Scotland. It causes temporary gill development in the user, genuine physiological shift, not a spell effect, so it's not susceptible to magical interference. An hour of underwater breathing, possibly longer depending on body mass. She looked at him. I've been trying to source it for 2 weeks. It's difficult to obtain in quantity, which is why it's not my first choice. What's your first choice? The bubblehead charm, she said. But it takes sustained concentration and it's susceptible to disruption. In a task environment, sustained concentration can't be guaranteed. She paused. What were you considering? I hadn't gotten that far yet, Harry said honestly. I've been otherwise occupied. She looked at him for a moment. The ministry investigator was here today. Yes. Are you going to tell me what happened to you? She asked. Not obtrusively. The same tone she'd used at lunch, neutral, genuinely interested, leaving the door completely open for him to close it. Harry considered. He'd spent 4 days being carefully selective about who knew what, and that was the right strategy for the proceeding, for the legal architecture. But Fleur was not inside the school's institutional structure. She had no relationship with Dumbledore, no history with the Weasleys, no loyalty to any of the intersecting networks that made every other conversation he'd had in the last 4 days require some degree of navigation. She was just a person. He told her. She listened without interrupting, which in his current experience was rarer than it should have been. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the table. 5 years, she said. Since I was 9. She looked up. You said one of the compounds suppressed independent magical escalation. Her voice had changed slightly, there was something sharper in it, a kind of professional interest. Since the antidote? I haven't had a chance to test it properly, he said. You should, she said. Before the second task. She held his gaze. I was asked to compete in this tournament as the best student from Beauxbatons. I was told I was exceptional. She said it without vanity, just as information. When I arrived here and saw the way things were set up, the way the tasks had been designed, the weight given to physical danger over magical sophistication, I wondered. Because the tournament was supposed to measure the best. But it seemed designed to suit a specific type of best. She paused. Now I wonder differently. Harry looked at her. You think the tournament was designed with me in mind? I think you were put in it for a reason, she said, and the reason was not your benefit. The thought sat between them like something that had already been true and was now just visible. The third task, Harry said slowly. A maze. After Dumbledore spent 4 years making me compliant and suppressing my magical ceiling, putting me in a maze with a dark wizard's obstacles and a portkey at the center. He stopped. Fleur's expression was entirely still. He knew about the portkey, Harry said. He had to. He's the headmaster. The tournament organizers work with him. Or he put it there himself, Fleur said quietly. The library was very quiet around them. Outside the window, the grounds were dark and the lake was a black mirror under the cloud-covered sky. I need to think about that, Harry said. So do I, she said. But think about it after you've tested your magic. She pulled one of her books toward her. Now, Gillyweed vs. Bubblehead Charm. Walk me through your reasoning on aquatic task preparation. They worked for 2 hours, and the conversation moved from the second task to broader tournament strategy to a surprisingly absorbing debate about the ethics of inter-school competition that Fleur had very definite opinions on, and Harry found himself arguing back with a facility and sharpness that kept startling him, the feeling of his own mind working at full throttle, like a window that had been stuck for years had finally been opened all the way. At 9 o'clock she gathered her books and said, same time Thursday, as a statement rather than a question. Thursday I'm in Hogsmeade, Harry said. She raised an eyebrow. He explained Augusta Longbottom. Her expression moved through brief surprise to something that looked like respect. Friday, then, she said. And she left, and Harry sat in the library for a few minutes longer with his notes spread in front of him and thought about portkeys and mazes and a very old man's very long game. Wednesday morning, Harry Potter went to the Quidditch pitch at 6 o'clock. The pitch was empty at 6 in December, too cold and too early for anyone sensible, and the mist was sitting low over the grass so that the goalposts appeared to float. He hadn't told anyone he was going. He'd woken up before his alarm, lain in the dark for exactly 4 minutes, and then gotten up and dressed and gone. He had his wand. He stood in the center of the pitch and looked at the 3 goals at the far end and took one breath, and then he started. He ran spells he'd learned in class, first, the basics, the things he'd been doing for 3 years. Wingardium Leviosa to lift a stone he'd picked up from the path. Lumos. Expelliarmus. He was not testing the spells. He was testing the engine behind them. The difference was immediate and physical. The sensation of casting a spell before the antidote had been, he hadn't had a comparison, so he hadn't known it was anything other than normal. But now, running spells in the empty mist of the pitch, he could feel the difference the way you could feel the difference between pushing a door that was slightly stuck and pushing a door that swung freely. The magic came from somewhere deeper and it arrived faster and it cost him less. He escalated. He tried a shield charm. The protego came up like a wall, solid and even, better than anything he'd produced in class. He tried to push it, pushed the intent behind it, tested what happened when he stopped managing the output and just let it be as large as it wanted to be. The shield expanded to roughly 3 times its usual diameter, covering a 10-foot radius, and held perfectly steady. He let it fall and stood there in the mist breathing steadily. Then he tried something he'd never attempted before outside of the accidental magic of his childhood. He pointed his wand at the fog on the pitch, the low-lying mist, and didn't use a specific spell. He used intent. He pushed something outward, a general will, a request rather than a command. The mist rolled back from him in a perfect circle, 20 feet of cleared air in every direction, and held. He stood in the center of it. After a moment he let it go and the mist crept back. He thought about the suppressor compound Pomfrey had found, the one that had been targeting his instinct for independent magical escalation since 3rd year. He thought about what 3rd year had been like. He thought about the Patronus, which he'd managed in 3rd year, which was newt-level magic, which he'd produced as a 13-year-old while being actively dosed with something designed to limit exactly that kind of magical escalation. He wondered what he was capable of without it and felt, for the first time in his life, something he recognized after a moment as genuine anticipation. He spent an hour on the pitch, alone in the mist, pushing the edges of everything he knew how to do and finding that the edges were considerably further out than he'd thought. When he came back inside, cheeks red and fingers cold and mind absolutely clear, he stopped in the entrance hall and wrote a quick note to Pomfrey, the 5th compound. Was it the only suppressor, or were there others like it that I should know about? Her reply came to him in Charms class, slipped under the door by a 2nd-year messenger. Based on the specimen analysis from St. Mungo's, the 5th compound is the only active suppressor. However, the analysis also notes that the compounding of the 5 together over 5 years created a synergistic effect, each one amplified the others. The removal of all 5 at once means the restoration of function is not additive but exponential. Be careful. Harry read it twice, then tucked it into his robe. Be careful. He filed that next to Sirius's voice saying don't get caught and Fleur's voice saying test your magic and Hermione's voice running through legal provisions, and he thought about all of these people who were now, actually and freely and of their own choice, on his side. It felt, architecturally different from before. He could see the structure of it clearly, not the warm, ambient assurance that everything was fine and everyone was trustworthy, which had been the compound's primary gift and primary lie, but something harder and more real. These people were here. They'd chosen to be here. Nobody had put anything in their pumpkin juice to make them care about him. That distinction, he was learning, was the difference between a foundation and a stage set. Thursday morning brought an owl from Calder. The Board of Governors has convened an emergency session for this coming Saturday. Your presence will be requested. Pomfrey will attend as primary witness. Director Bones will attend in observer capacity. I would advise you to prepare a written statement in addition to oral testimony. Written statements are entered into the formal record while oral testimony can be challenged. If you have legal representation, now would be the time to engage them. G. Calder. Saturday. 4 days. Harry read the letter at breakfast, folded it, and thought about who in his current orbit could write a legal statement. The answer was clear before he'd finished the thought. He looked down the table to where Hermione was eating with singular focus, already reading something propped against the pumpkin juice jug that she wasn't drinking from, because she'd been avoiding the communal pumpkin juice since Monday on general principle. Hermione, he said. She looked up. Board of Governors. Saturday. I need a written statement drafted. She reached into her bag without blinking and produced a blank roll of parchment. I'll have a draft to you by tonight, she said. What angle do you want to lead with? Medical harm, legal authority breach, or, start with the medical harm, Harry said. The legal breach follows from it. The medical harm is the human story and the legal breach is the institutional accountability. Lead with the human and close with the law. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was doing several things at once. Then she wrote something on her parchment. Right, she said. Tonight. Ron was watching this exchange from 3 seats down. He'd been gradually moving closer over the last 3 days, not dramatically, not with fanfare, just incrementally closing the distance in the way that Ron expressed things when he processed them and made a decision he wasn't going to announce. I want to help, he said. Bluntly. I don't know how. But I want to. Harry looked at him. You can come to Hogsmeade with me this afternoon, he said. I'm meeting someone and a second person in the meeting would be useful. Who? Augusta Longbottom. Ron blinked. Neville's gran. Yes. Ron was quiet for a moment, visibly recalibrating. Right, he said. Okay. I'll come. Hogsmeade in December was the village that Christmas had decided to specifically target, snow on every roof, lights in every window, the smell of something warm drifting out of the 3 broomsticks every time the door opened. It should have been festive. It was, objectively, quite festive. Augusta Longbottom was waiting at a corner table of Madame Pudafoots, which was the one café in Hogsmeade that nobody Harry knew had ever voluntarily entered, and which was perhaps why she'd chosen it. She was a tall woman with a rigidity of spine that suggested a lifetime of refusing to be comfortable when upright wasn't required, and she had a taxidermied vulture on her hat that Harry managed not to stare at for approximately 2 minutes before giving up. She looked at him across the tea table with the sharp, assessing gaze of someone who was running a personal competence examination in real time. Sit, she said. They sat. Ron shot the vulture one quick look and then fixed his eyes on the table. My grandson tells me you've been methodical, Augusta said, without preamble. That's good. The wizarding world does not reward methodical as well as it should, but it is still better than the alternative. She poured tea without asking whether they wanted any. Tell me what you need from me. Harry told her. He was economical, he'd learned, in 4 days of explaining this to various people, exactly how much information was required for each audience, and Augusta Longbottom was an audience that needed the structure and the strategy, not the emotional reality, which she could extrapolate herself. She listened without interrupting, which Harry was beginning to appreciate as a specific quality in a person. When he finished, she set down her teacup. You need Wizengamot presence, she said. Not influence, presence. Bodies in seats. When this goes to the full Wizengamot, and it will go, you need enough of the neutral seats occupied by people who are not Dumbledore's historical allies to ensure a fair process. How many can you bring? She thought about it with the focused expression of someone counting actual available resources. 7, she said. Possibly 9 if I call in 2 specific favors. All of them neutral parties with no direct ties to Dumbledore's faction and all of them with a personal investment in medical ethics law following, she stopped briefly. Following certain historical cases. Following what happened to Frank and Alice. Harry didn't say it. She didn't say it. They both understood. That would be enough to prevent a procedural burial, Harry said. Yes, she agreed. It would. She looked at him steadily. You're 14 years old. Yes. You're doing this without a solicitor. Hermione Granger is drafting my written statement. Augusta's eyebrows moved. The Granger girl. She seemed to turn the name over. She's the brightest student at Hogwarts in 30 years by some accounts. By her own account she's significantly more modest, Harry said. She'd say 20 years. Ron made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Augusta did something that was almost a smile. Your godfather's case, she said. Sirius Black. I want you to know I voted against his imprisonment in 1981. I was in the minority. The proceedings were irregular. She said the word with the particular weight of someone for whom that word contained a great deal of compressed fury. He never had a trial. I know, Harry said. We're filing a petition for case review alongside the other proceedings. Good. She picked up her teacup again. My late husband had a saying. The law is only as just as the people willing to enforce it. Most people hear that as a cynical statement. She paused. It's not. It's a responsibility. Someone has to be willing. She looked at Harry with that sharp, dry assessment. Someone, she said, appears to be willing. Harry looked back at her without flinching. Yes, he said simply. She set down her teacup with a decisive click. Right, Augusta Longbottom said. Let's get to work. They stayed for 2 hours. Ron, who had been quiet for most of it, turned out to have a sharper political memory than Harry had realized. He'd grown up with Arthur Weasley talking about ministry politics at dinner and had absorbed more than anyone had credited. He named 3 Wisengamot members whose past voting records were relevant and cited specific cases, and Augusta gave him a look that suggested she was revising her assessment of the Weasley children's utility in a methodical upward direction. Leaving Hogsmeade in the mid-afternoon dark, walking back up the path to the school, Ron said nothing for a while. The cold had settled in properly now, frost on the stones, their breath visible. Gran sent another letter, he said eventually. Harry waited. I didn't open it, Ron said. Harry nodded. I'll open it eventually, Ron said. Not yet. The lights of Hogwarts appeared ahead through the dark, the castle enormous and golden against the winter sky. She's your mum, Harry said. However complicated everything else is, that doesn't stop being true. You don't have to resolve it all at once. Ron was quiet. I know she cares about you, Harry said. I don't think she did this to hurt you. I think she made a choice that she convinced herself was the right one. He paused. The same way Dumbledore convinced himself. That's not, Ron started. Stopped. That's not really better, is it? No, Harry said honestly. It's not. They walked the rest of the way in silence, and the castle rose around them as they went through the gates, enormous and certain and full of 5 years of quiet, deliberate decisions that had now, finally, irrevocably, been disturbed. Saturday was coming. Harry had a statement to review, a Board of Governors session to prepare for, a second task to solve, and a magical capacity he was still discovering the dimensions of. He felt none of the things the compounds had told him to feel, the comfortable assurance, the processed certainty, the muted edge of instinct. He felt the actual texture of the situation instead, which was complicated and hard and required real work. It was, he had decided, significantly better. Chapter 4, The Headmaster's Argument. Saturday arrived the way consequential days often did at Hogwarts, quietly, without announcement, the castle going about its usual morning business while something irreversible gathered itself in the background. Harry was up at 5:30. He'd slept well, which still surprised him each morning, the clean, deep sleep of a mind that wasn't being softened overnight, that was allowed to process things naturally and wake up with whatever it had worked out in the dark. He lay still for a few minutes listening to the dormitory, Ron's breathing, Neville's, Dean's quiet shift in his sleep, and then he got up and dressed in the grey before dawn light without waking anyone. He had Hermione's draft. She'd delivered it Thursday evening, 12 pages of dense, precise legal argument that led with the medical evidence, established the chain of authorization with reference to the requisition forms, addressed the specific legal statutes violated under wizarding medical law, and closed with a paragraph about precedent that was simultaneously a warning to the board and a signpost to the Wisengamot. He'd read it 3 times and made 4 small changes, all of them to tone. She'd been too careful in places, had hedged where the evidence didn't require hedging. He'd removed the hedges. The final version was on his desk. He picked it up, rolled it, and tucked it inside his robes. He went down to the common room and sat in front of the fire and waited for the castle to wake up. At 6:15, someone came down the stairs. It was Ron. He sat down in the chair across from Harry without saying anything, pulled his legs up, and stared at the fire. He was still in his pajamas and his hair was doing several contradictory things. He looked like someone who had been awake for a while and had finally given up on sleep being useful. "I opened Mum's letter last night," he said. Harry waited. "She says Dumbledore told her it was for the greater good," Ron said. "That's a direct quote, apparently, from a conversation she had with him. She says it was years ago, she says she doesn't know the specifics, she says she trusted that he knew what he was doing." He paused. "She didn't say sorry." The fire shifted. "She didn't say sorry," Ron said again, and this time there was something underneath the flatness of his voice that was the specific sound of a person pressing down on something that wanted to come up. "She might need time to get there," Harry said. "She might," Ron said. "Or she might just, not." He looked at Harry. "How are you not angrier at her? You've been calm about this all week and I'm furious and it's not even about me." "I'm angry," Harry said. "But the anger is most useful when it's directed. Your mum is not the center of this. She's on the periphery. She made a choice that I think she needs to be accountable for, but she's not the one I'm focused on." "Dumbledore." "Dumbledore," Harry agreed. "And the system that made it possible for him to do this for 5 years without anyone asking questions." Ron was quiet for a moment. "I need you to know," he said, "that I never noticed anything in your pumpkin juice. I wasn't part of it. I don't think Dad was either. I think Mum just," he stopped. "I know," Harry said. "I've never thought you were part of it. But I should have noticed something was wrong with you. 3 years and I just thought you were, sorted." He used the same word he'd used on Sunday, and the self-reproach in it was different now, sharper, less abstract. He'd been sitting with it all week and it had clarified into something real. "Ron." Harry leaned forward. "The compounds were specifically designed so that nobody would notice. The people around me weren't supposed to see it. You not seeing it is evidence that it was well executed, not evidence that you failed." He paused. "The person who should have noticed was the one who prepared the compounds and administered them and could observe the effects directly." Ron's jaw tightened. "Snape. And Dumbledore." The fire popped and settled. Outside the tower windows, the sky was starting to go from black to deep gray. "I want to come to the board session," Ron said. "Today. I know I don't have legal standing or whatever, but I want to be there." "You can sit in the gallery," Harry said. Calder confirmed that the session is semi-public. "Invited observers." "Then I'm an invited observer." He stood up, tugging his pajama top straight with the decisive energy of someone who has just finished a decision. "I'm going to get dressed." He disappeared back up the stairs, and Harry turned back to the fire and thought about Dumbledore and about what today was going to look like, and the thing he kept returning to was not the board session itself but the conversation that was almost certainly going to happen before it. Dumbledore sent for him at 8 o'clock. The note was delivered by a portrait, a small oil painting of a medieval clerk that normally lived in a corridor on the 3rd floor, appearing in the common room entrance with its painted scroll and its painted ink to convey the headmaster's request with miniaturized formality. Harry read the note, which asked him to come to the headmaster's office at 8:30 before the board session, and thought about whether to go. He went. He'd decided on this on Thursday, that when Dumbledore asked for a meeting before the board session, he would go, because not going was a position that read as fear and he was not afraid. He had everything he needed. The documentation was with Calder. The statement was in his robe. Sirius knew everything. Amelia Bones was in the building. There was nothing Dumbledore could say this morning that could affect the structure of what had already been built. The gargoyle stepped aside when he arrived, which meant Dumbledore had already keyed the passage open for him, and he climbed the spiral staircase and knocked. "Come in, Harry." The office was warm and complicated in the way it always was, the whirring silver instruments, the portraits of former headmasters in their frames, Fawkes on his perch in the corner watching with the unnerving ancient patience of something that had died and come back enough times to have a considered opinion on most situations. The desk was clear except for a single folder Harry recognized as a copy of the diagnostic report. Dumbledore was standing at the window, looking out over the grounds. He turned when Harry came in. "Please, sit down," he said. Harry sat. He didn't put the statement on the desk. He kept it inside his robe and folded his hands and waited. Dumbledore came and sat behind his desk. He looked, Harry thought, exactly as he always looked, the half-moon glasses, the silver beard, the quality of patient, measured attention that his face had never quite stopped performing even now. But there were things around the edges this morning. A weight behind the eyes. The particular expression of a man who has spent several days rehearsing a conversation and is not entirely confident in any of the versions he's prepared. "I want to speak with you honestly this morning," Dumbledore began. "I'd appreciate that," Harry said. "I made decisions during your years here," Dumbledore said, "that I want to explain in full before the board session. I owe you that much." "You can try," Harry said, evenly. "I'll listen." Something moved in Dumbledore's expression at the word try, a recognition, perhaps, that this was not the conversation he'd had earlier in the week in the hospital wing, that something had shifted further in the interim. He folded his hands on the desk. "You know about the prophecy," he said. Harry hadn't been expecting that. He kept his face still. "Tell me what I need to know about it." Dumbledore studied him for a moment, then seemed to accept that the usual careful parceling of information was no longer going to work as a technique. "There is a prophecy," he said, "made before your birth. It states that a boy born at the end of July to parents who had thrice defied Voldemort would have the power to vanquish him, that neither could live while the other survived." He paused. "Voldemort heard part of this prophecy. It is why your parents were targeted. It is why he marked you as his equal." Harry processed this carefully. He'd suspected something like it, the pieces had been there if you looked at the pattern of his life with clear eyes. But hearing it said plainly was different from suspecting it. "And the compounds," Harry said. "You thought they were necessary because of the prophecy." "I believed," Dumbledore said, "that a boy who understood the full weight of what he was, what he represented, too early would either be destroyed by the knowledge or would act against it in ways that would endanger everything. I believed that keeping you, cooperative, trusting, willing to work within the structures I had arranged for your protection, was the only way to preserve you long enough to give you a fighting chance." He looked at Harry. "I was wrong." The word landed with precision in the quiet office. "I was wrong in the method," Dumbledore continued, "and I was wrong in my assessment of what you required. What I see in front of me now," he stopped. "What I see now is someone who is more capable, more intelligent, and more equipped than I gave you credit for. I was protecting a version of you that needed less protecting than I thought." Harry sat with this. "That's a better apology than I expected," he said. "It's not an apology," Dumbledore said, and there was something very honest in his voice now, something that the performance had dropped away from. "It's an accounting. I'm not certain I can honestly claim to be sorry for the intention, Harry. I still believe Voldemort will return and I still believe you are the only person positioned to stop him. What I am sorry for is the arrogance of deciding that your autonomy was the cost I had the right to impose." Harry looked at him for a long moment. This was the thing about Dumbledore that Sirius had warned him about. The intelligence of it. The way the argument was almost exactly right, how it acknowledged the central wrong, granted the critical concession, and then repositioned the speaker as someone operating from genuine and tragic conviction rather than simple malice. It was a form of honesty that was also, structurally, a form of influence. "I want to ask you something," Harry said. "Of course." "The tournament. The Triwizard Cup. The third task." He kept his voice level. "Did you know about the portkey?" The silence was approximately 1 second long. 1 second was more than enough. "Harry, yes or no," Harry said. Dumbledore's hands, folded on the desk, did not move. His expression did not shift. And in the space where a straight answer should have been, there was instead a breath, the briefest reorganization of approach. The situation is, he began. More complicated, Harry said. Yes. You've said that. Let me tell you what I think the situation is. He leaned forward slightly. I think the cup was meant to be a portkey to a location where Voldemort could use my blood in a resurrection ritual. I think the tournament was the mechanism for ensuring I'd be alone and in the maze at the right moment. I think the fact that I was dosed with compliance compounds for 5 years was meant to ensure that when things went wrong, because you knew things would go wrong, I would respond the way a cooperative, trusting boy who didn't question authority would respond. He paused. And I think you told yourself that the plan was necessary because the prophecy required me to face him and better it happen under controlled conditions than uncontrolled ones. The silence in the office was absolute. Fawkes made a soft sound from his perch. You've given this considerable thought, Dumbledore said quietly. I've had nothing but time and a clear head for 5 days, Harry said. Yes. I have. He straightened. I'm going to the board session in an hour. I'm going to give my statement, I'm going to present the evidence, and I'm going to let the process work. I'm not going to go in there and tell them what I just told you. He paused. Not today. Dumbledore's expression shifted fractionally. Why not? Because I can't prove it yet, Harry said simply. I'm not going to accuse you of something I can't prove. That's not how this works. He looked at the old man steadily. But I want you to know that I know. And I want you to think about whether the plan can proceed as designed, now that the boy you need to be cooperative and compliant has decided not to be. He let that sit for a moment. Because I'm still going to be in that maze, headmaster. I'm going into it with clear eyes and full power and the specific knowledge that the Triwizard Cup is a portkey. And whatever's waiting at the other end of it is going to meet a very different person than the one you spent 5 years preparing. He stood up. I'll see you at the board session, he said. And he walked to the door of the headmaster's office, and behind him Dumbledore said nothing, and the portraits on the walls watched, and Fawkes gave a single quiet trill that might have been anything and might have been everything. The Board of Governors session was held in a conference room off the great hall that Harry hadn't known existed, accessible through a panel behind one of the tapestries near the main doors, opening into a long stone-walled room with a U-shaped table and high windows that looked out over the eastern grounds. The board occupied the curve of the U, 12 witches and wizards in formal robes, ranging in age from possibly 50 to one distinguished woman who appeared to be at least 120 and showed no sign of finding this situation remarkable. Calder was at a side table with his documentation folder. Pomfrey sat beside him, in full Hogwarts medical uniform, her written statement in front of her and her hands folded in the manner of someone who has decided they are a wall and will remain a wall. Amelia Bones sat in an observer chair along the right wall. She was a broad-shouldered witch with a monocle and short grey hair who looked as though she had developed an immunity to being impressed by things, and she was watching the room with the patient attentiveness of someone who was here to observe and remember everything. Augusta Longbottom was in the observer gallery on the left, with 2 witches and a wizard Harry didn't recognize, the first installment of her promised contingent, he assumed, positioned to observe rather than participate. Harry sat at the single chair at the open end of the U, facing the board, with the statement in his hand and his back straight. Dumbledore was not present. This had apparently been a condition established by Calder in advance. The subject of the inquiry could not be required to give testimony in the presence of the individual against whom the inquiry was directed. Dumbledore had accepted this without objection, which Harry thought said something about the calculation behind his composure this morning. The board chair, a tall witch named Frederica Greer with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, opened the session with formal language about the purpose of the inquiry and the standards of evidence that would apply, and then looked at Harry. Mr. Potter, she said. You may present your statement. He unrolled the parchment. 12 pages, Hermione's architecture, his adjustments. He read it clearly and at an even pace, and the room was quiet enough that he could hear the quill of the board's note-keeper scratching steadily. He read the diagnostic findings. He read the 5 compounds identified and their specific effects. He read the authorization chain from the requisition forms. He read the legal statutes governing medical ethics in educational institutions. He read the subsection 7(c) provision and the 1962 amendment. He read the statement about what 5 years of compounded loyalty modification compounds did to a developing brain's baseline cognitive function. He read Pomfrey's clinical assessment of the saturation crisis and what would have happened if the antidote had been administered 20 minutes later. He didn't editorialize. He didn't reach for sympathy. He gave the board the facts in the order that made their significance unavoidable, which was the thing Hermione had understood instinctively and that he trusted her to get right. When he finished, there was a silence. Then a board member at the left end of the table, a heavy-set wizard with a purple waistcoat, said, "The requisition forms you've referenced. These are Hogwarts administrative documents." "Yes." "Bearing the signatures of the headmaster and the potions master." "Yes." "You have copies here." "Calder has the certified copies," Harry said. "The originals are in secure custody." The board member nodded slowly, with the expression of someone trying to locate a technicality and not finding one. Greer said, "Madam Pomfrey. Your testimony corroborates the diagnostic findings as presented?" Pomfrey stood. "Every finding in Mr. Potter's statement is consistent with my clinical records and the certified specimen analysis from St. Mungo's," she said. "The compounds identified were unambiguously present. The authorization documents are genuine Hogwarts administrative records. The medical harm is real and documented." She sat down. Another board member, a younger witch at the center of the table, said, "Mr. Potter. You've identified the 5th compound as a magical suppressor. This compound was introduced in your 3rd year. Can you speak to the effect of its removal?" Harry thought about the pitch at dawn on Wednesday. The mist rolling back. The shield at 10-foot radius. The spell that worked like a door swinging free. "Yes," he said. "The effect of the compound's removal has been significant. My magical output since the antidote is substantially greater than anything I've previously produced, in ways consistent with what you'd expect from an exponential rather than additive restoration as described in the specimen analysis." He paused. What the compound was suppressing was not my ability to perform magic. It was my instinct to push past comfortable limits. To discover what I was actually capable of. The room was quiet. "Someone," he said, "spent 3 years ensuring I wouldn't find out." Another silence. Greer was looking at him with an expression that was professionally composed but had something running underneath it. "Director Bones," Greer said, turning to the observer. "The Ministry's position?" Amelia Bones uncrossed her legs and sat forward. "The Ministry's position," she said, in a voice that had the quality of something that had been decided some time ago and required only formal articulation, "is that the evidence as presented constitutes sufficient basis for a formal investigation under Section 12 of the Potions Regulation Act and Section 47 of the Wizarding Medical Ethics Code. Investigator Calder has already been assigned and will continue. The Ministry will additionally be reviewing the appointment and authorization process for all compounds administered to Hogwarts students over the relevant period." She paused. "The Ministry will also be issuing a formal request that the Board consider the question of whether the current headmaster's continued presence in his role is appropriate during an active investigation." The room reacted to this, not dramatically, not noisily, but in the way rooms reacted when something large moved, a settling, a weight shift, several people changing their body language simultaneously. Greer said, "The board will need to deliberate." "Of course," Bones said. Harry looked at Calder, who gave him a brief, precise nod that said this is going as well as it can go. The session went for another 2 hours. 3 board members asked extended questions about the legal provisions, 2 focused on the authorization chain, and one asked Harry a series of questions about his day-to-day experience over 5 years that were designed to establish the living reality of the harm rather than just the technical documentation. He answered everything. He was precise and honest, and he did not reach for dramatic framing because the facts were dramatic enough without it. At the end, as the formal session closed and people began to gather their things, Augusta Longbottom crossed the room to Harry and said quietly, "You have 7 more votes on that board than you had this morning." She said it with the satisfaction of someone ticking boxes. "You did well." "Hermione Granger did well," Harry said. "I read her work." Augusta looked at him. "You knew what she'd written and you chose it and you delivered it. That's doing well." She patted his arm once, firmly, in the manner of a woman who didn't make the gesture lightly. "Thursday was useful. I'll have the remaining votes confirmed by end of week." She left. Bones was talking to Calder. Pomfrey was reviewing her notes. Harry stood in the emptying room and breathed and thought that the worst of it, the part where he'd had to sit at the open end of a U-shaped table and describe 5 years of someone else's design to 12 strangers, was done. He found Snape in the corridor outside the potions classroom at 2:30. He hadn't planned this. He'd been walking back toward Gryffindor Tower and he'd turned a corner and there was Snape, alone, carrying a stack of unmarked essays with the air of a man moving through his professional obligations as a way of not standing still with his thoughts. They stopped when they saw each other. Harry thought about the conversation on Monday. Snape's face in the dungeon doorway, the architecture of his self-narrative quietly removed. The cancelled lessons. The board session, Harry said. It went well. Snape said nothing. Calder is going to want your statement, Harry said. He'll approach you formally, probably Monday. You should know that the requisition forms establish the chain clearly, your preparation, Dumbledore's authorization. The question Calder will be most interested in is the one you can answer and Dumbledore can't. Snape looked at him with an expression that was nothing like the usual contempt. The contempt was there, but it was operating at reduced capacity over something much more complicated. And what question is that? Whether you had a choice, Harry said. Whether the authorization came with something attached to it. Whether refusing was an option you actually had. A long silence. The dungeon corridor was cold and lit with the greenish torchlight that made everyone in it look like they were underwater. Somewhere above them, the school was going about its Saturday business. You're doing this, Snape said slowly, as though you understand what it means to be in a position where refusing isn't a real option. I was dosed for 5 years with compounds designed to make compliance feel like choice, Harry said. I have a reasonable appreciation for the difference between the two. Snape was quiet for what felt like a long time. The 5th compound, he said finally. His voice was very low. The suppressor. I didn't know that one was being added until the 3rd-year orders. When I saw it in the list, he stopped. What did you do? Harry asked. I told myself, Snape said, with a specific self-directed bitterness that Harry had never heard in his voice before, that the headmaster had reasons I wasn't privy to. I told myself that the boys' safety was the priority and that Albus Dumbledore had never made a decision that hadn't ultimately served the right goal. He looked at Harry. I told myself a great many things. And now? Snape set the essays down on a nearby ledge and looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at Harry with an expression that was stripped of everything except what it actually was, which was the expression of someone who had spent a long time serving 2 masters and had lost things in service of both of them and was standing in the wreckage of both accounts simultaneously. Your mother, he said, would not have, she would have, he stopped. Started differently. She would have found this intolerable. What was done to you? She would have considered it an act of violence. It was an act of violence, Harry said. A slow one. Snape nodded once. A single, precise movement that was the closest thing to an unqualified admission Harry had ever seen from him. When Calder comes, Harry said, tell him the truth. All of it. Including what you just told me, that you saw the fifth compound added and you questioned it and you didn't act. He paused. The context matters. But it only helps you if you provide it. Snape looked at him with an unreadable expression. Why, he said, are you? Because I don't want destruction, Harry said, for the second time in a week. I want accountability. Those are different things. He picked up Snape's essays from the ledge and held them out. And because I think you're the person in this entire situation who has the most honest account of how it actually worked, and that account matters for the record. Snape took the essays. He looked at Harry for a long moment with the expression of someone who has been carrying a specific weight for a very long time and has just been asked to set it down somewhere purposeful rather than somewhere private. Potter, he said. Professor. He stopped again. His jaw set. I will speak to Calder. It wasn't an apology. Harry hadn't asked for one. It was enough. Saturday evening in Gryffindor Tower had its own particular texture, the end-of-week looseness of it, people sprawled on sofas, the wireless playing something cheerful from the common room's old set, Fred and George staging some kind of competitive event involving a fanged frisbee that McGonagall would absolutely not sanction if she knew about it. Harry came back through the portrait hole at 5 and found Hermione and Ron together on the sofa by the fire. Hermione had a book. Ron had chess pieces arranged in front of him that he was moving without much attention, more thinking than playing. They both looked up when Harry came in. How did it go? Hermione asked. He sat down and told them. Both of them, the whole session, the exchange with Bones, the board's reaction, Augusta Longbottom's count. He told them about Snape too, because they'd earned the full version. When he finished, Ron let out a breath. So Dumbledore might actually be suspended from the headmaster role. The board is deliberating, Harry said. They have to act within the school term framework. But yes. Bones made the request formally, which means it's on the record and they have to respond. Hermione was very still in the way she was still when something important was clicking into place. If he's suspended during the investigation, she said, the tournament continues under different oversight. Yes. Which means the third task is still running, she said, but without Dumbledore controlling the conditions. Yes. She looked at him. He looked at her. The unspoken part of this was large and sat in the air between them very clearly. He'll find another way, she said quietly. To arrange what he was arranging. He'll try, Harry said. But I know what's coming. Which is the difference? He leaned back in his chair. The maze is in June. 6 months. I have 6 months, a clear head, and no ceiling on what I can do. He paused. I'm not afraid of what's in the maze. Ron was looking at him. You said the port key takes you to Voldemort. To a resurrection ritual, Harry said. My blood is apparently the specific ingredient required. Ron processed this with the particular face he made when something was genuinely alarming and he was trying to find a way to treat it as information rather than catastrophe. So what happens when you get there, he said, if you know it's coming? Then I'm prepared, Harry said. Instead of stumbling into it blind and alone. He looked at both of them. And I won't be going in as the boy who spent 5 years being made cooperative and trusting and unable to push past his own limits. He paused. I'll be going in as myself. Ron and Hermione were both quiet for a moment. Then Ron said, right, in the voice he used when he decided something required his participation regardless of his comfort level. Then we help you prepare. Between now and June, whatever you need, research, practice, whatever. Hermione said, I'll start on defensive magic tonight. There are advanced shield variations I've been wanting to test anyway. You've been wanting to test advanced shield variations, Ron said. For personal academic interest, she said primly. Harry looked at both of them. At Ron with his chess pieces and his complicated family loyalty and his absolute stubbornness about where he placed himself in a crisis. At Hermione with her book and her parchment and her absolute refusal to accept a problem as larger than it could be analyzed. "Thank you," he said. "Both of you." Hermione said, "Obviously." Ron said, "Shut up, you don't have to thank us," and picked up a chess piece and made a move that was probably terrible but was made with complete conviction. Harry laughed. It came out clean and unguarded and it surprised him slightly, the ease of it, the lack of anything chemical in the chemistry of just being here, in this room, with these two particular people who were here because they'd chosen to be. From the other side of the common room, Fred Weasley's voice carried over, "Oi, Harry. You look suspiciously cheerful for someone who spent the day in a legal proceeding." "Leave him alone," George added. "He's allowed to be cheerful. He's had a week." Harry shook his head and turned back to the fire. Through the window the December evening was black and cold and the grounds were dark, and somewhere in the castle Dumbledore was sitting with whatever he was sitting with, and somewhere in the ministry Calder was writing up his notes, and in 6 months there was a maze with a port key at the center. Harry picked up the advanced defense textbook Hermione had apparently already retrieved from her bag and placed at his elbow in preparation for this exact moment. He opened it to Chapter 1. Chapter 5, The Maze and the Boy Who Came Back Different. 6 months was a long time and no time at all. It was long enough for the Board of Governors to suspend Dumbledore from active headmaster duties pending investigation, a formal decision delivered in January by Frederica Greer in a letter that was the most carefully worded document Harry had read since Hermione's statement, each sentence doing several things at once. McGonagall was appointed acting headmistress. She received the appointment at breakfast on a Tuesday and went straight back to teaching her first class of the day, which said everything necessary about her. It was long enough for Sirius's case to be formally reviewed by a 3-person Wisengamot panel that Amelia Bones had assembled with the specific personnel choices of someone who had been waiting for the right moment. The review took 3 weeks. At the end of it, the panel's finding was that Sirius Black had been imprisoned without trial in violation of 3 distinct provisions of Wizarding legal code, and that his imprisonment was void. He walked out of a ministry hearing room on a Wednesday afternoon in February a free man, into a world that was technically the same one he'd left but felt structurally different in ways that took him several days to stop being startled by. He came to Hogsmeade the following Saturday. Harry saw him across the street outside the 3 Broomsticks and they walked toward each other and Sirius pulled him into a hug that lasted considerably longer than either of them acknowledged afterward, and Harry felt the specific solidity of having someone who was unambiguously, legally, completely his. It was long enough for Snape's testimony to go on the record. He gave Calder 4 hours in a ministry interview room in February, and Harry didn't know the specifics of what he said, that was between Snape and the investigation, but Calder told him afterward, in the brief and economic way Calder communicated everything, that the testimony had been comprehensive and that it had significantly clarified the authorization structure. It was long enough for Harry to go to the pitch every morning at 6 days out of 7, and work. He did this alone, mostly, though Hermione joined him on Wednesday mornings and Fleur occasionally appeared on Fridays when her own schedule permitted. He didn't follow a plan in the structured, Hermione-approved sense of the word, he followed his own instinct, which turned out to be the better guide, because his instinct now was a clean and calibrated thing that knew what it needed and went directly for it without the usual friction. He worked on shields first, not because they were the most exciting but because a solid defense was the foundation everything else stood on, and he wanted the foundation right before he built anything on it. By February the Protego he could produce covered a 15-foot radius and could be held indefinitely without active concentration. He could produce it non-verbally on his second attempt and verbally almost as a reflex. Then he worked on what he thought of as pressure, the ability to push intent through a spell rather than just intention. The difference between casting Expelliarmus at someone and meaning for them to lose their wand and casting it at someone with the full weight of his will behind it. The results were not subtle. He disarmed a training dummy across the full width of the pitch on a windless morning in March, which was 60 yards, which should not have been possible with a 4th year's wand control. He did it 3 times to be sure it wasn't a fluke. He worked on the Patronus through January and February and found that without the suppressor, without the compounds managing his emotional response to difficulty, the Patronus came from somewhere deeper and brighter than it had in third year. The stag appeared on the first attempt, fully corporeal, and cantered the length of the pitch, and Harry stood watching it with something complicated in his chest that was not pride exactly but was related to it. In March, he started working on things he'd found in the advanced defense texts, spells he had no right knowing yet at 14, theoretically, except that the theory had always been the easy part for him and the practical magic was coming now with a smoothness that made the theoretical gap irrelevant. He worked his way through fifth-year material in 6 weeks. Then sixth year. Hermione watched him perform a Protego Maxima on a Wednesday morning in April and said nothing for approximately 30 seconds and then said, "That's Newt level. That's an EWT level and you just did it on the third attempt." "Second," Harry said. She made a noise that was not quite a word and wrote something in her notebook. He was still Harry. He still laughed at Fred and George's experiments, still argued with Ron about Quidditch, still went to class and did his homework and sat in the Great Hall and ate meals. The things that had been genuine in him before were still genuine, they were just unfiltered now, which meant they were cleaner and more real and sometimes more intense, but they were recognizably his. He just didn't apologize for them anymore. He didn't manage them down into something easier for everyone else to be around. The second task happened in February. He used gillyweed. Dobby, it turned out, knew where it was kept in the Hogwarts greenhouses and arrived at his bedside at midnight the night before the task with a ball of it in his sock, which was a level of logistical support Harry found unexpectedly moving. He swam through an hour of cold dark lake, rescued Ron from the Merpeople's village, and came back up through the surface already thinking about the third task. He placed second overall after the 2 tasks, 1 point behind Cedric. He and Cedric had developed something that wasn't quite friendship but was more than the wary mutual respect of competitors, a direct working relationship, honest about its pragmatic elements. They trained together twice in April, comparing approaches to the anticipated obstacles in the maze. Cedric was good, genuinely skilled, careful, smart. Harry liked him with the clean uncomplicated liking of someone who had learned the difference between real regard and manufactured warmth. "You've changed," Cedric said, on a Tuesday in late April, sitting on the grass at the edge of the pitch after a session. He said it without judgment, just observation. "Since December," Harry said. "Since before that, actually. I've been watching all year, but December was when it became visible." He paused. "Whatever happened? It suits you." Harry looked at him. "Is that a problem for the tournament?" Cedric thought about it honestly. "Probably for my chances, yes," he said. "But I'm not going to pretend I'd rather the alternative." He looked at the sky. "I want to win a fair tournament. Not a rigged one." They sat with that for a moment. "The third task," Harry said. "I need to tell you something." He told Cedric about the portkey. Not everything, not Dumbledore's specific role, not the prophecy, but enough. The cup. The destination. What was waiting? He told it the way he told things now, directly and without softening, and watched Cedric's face go through the work of receiving it. "You're certain," Cedric said, when Harry finished. "As certain as I can be without having been there." Cedric was quiet for a moment. "Then neither of us touches the cup alone," he said. "If one of us reaches it, we wait. If either of us reaches it," Harry said, "we make a decision together about what comes next." He paused. "If something happens to me in there and you can get to the cup, I want you to throw it as far as you can from both of us and find the exit." "I mean that." Cedric looked at him. "And if something happens to me?" "Same," Harry said. "I won't let you get hurt by something I can see coming." Cedric nodded slowly. It was the nod of a person who had just rearranged his understanding of what the third task was. June arrived with the particular English stubbornness of a summer that had decided to be grey about it. The grounds were green and damp, the lake flat and dark, and the maze had been growing on the Quidditch pitch since February, tall dark hedges that had started knee-height and now stood 15 feet, their tops level and their interiors opaque, the whole thing smelling of cut grass and something else, something Harry had identified on a passing test as venomous tentacula. The night before the third task, Harry sat on his bed in the dormitory after everyone else had gone to sleep and ran through it. Not anxiously. He'd spent 6 months building toward this, and anxiety was the emotion of someone who hadn't prepared enough, and he had prepared enough. He ran through it the way a chess player ran through a game, not looking for reassurance but looking for the move he might have missed, the angle he hadn't fully considered. He thought about Voldemort. He'd thought about Voldemort a great deal over the 6 months, with a clarity that the compounds had apparently been suppressing, because thinking clearly about Voldemort led very directly to thinking about Dumbledore's plans in uncomfortable ways. What he knew: partial resurrection form, possessed animals and hosts, limited independent magic without a body, the blood ritual requiring a willing or unwilling sacrifice, and the specific magic of his mother's protection. What Fleur had said in January, leaning over research notes in the library: if the ritual requires your blood specifically and the blood carries the protection your mother cast, what does that mean for the person who uses it? Harry had thought about that for a long time. His mother's sacrifice had created a protection, a specific form of ancient magic, love-based, the kind that left a mark. If that protection was in his blood, and the blood was used in the ritual, he'd tested this as a theory with Hermione in February, approaching it as a purely academic question about blood magic and protective charms. She'd gone pale when she worked out what he was asking. The protection would pass into him, she'd said quietly. It would be anchored in his reconstructed body. He wouldn't know it was there. What would it do? She'd thought about it for a long time. I don't know exactly, she'd said honestly. But ancient magic that powerful doesn't just sit dormant. It reacts. She'd paused. It might make him vulnerable in ways he hasn't been before. Harry had filed that away. He also thought about the wand, the fact that at some point in this encounter, if his understanding was correct, their wands would interact in a way that had happened before only once, during the graveyard scene that hadn't happened yet. He knew about priori incantatem. He'd found it in a text in March and recognized it immediately as relevant and spent a week understanding exactly what it meant. He thought about his parents. He thought about what it would mean to see them, or their echoes, or whatever the reverse spell effect produced, and he thought about it without the managed distance the compounds had always put between him and the full weight of grief. Without the softening. Just the actual size of it, standing there looking at him. He sat with that for a while. Then he put it away, lay down, and slept. The morning of the third task had the particular texture of an important day that everyone was pretending was ordinary. Breakfast was too loud and too social, teachers who didn't usually sit together sat together, and the champions were watched with the specific attention of people who were seeing them for what might be the last time and were not saying so. Harry ate properly, a full breakfast, everything on his plate, Sirius's voice in his head saying actual food, and then went to the grounds to walk. He was halfway around the lake when Dumbledore fell into step beside him. This was unexpected. Not because Dumbledore was still at Hogwarts. He was, in a reduced capacity, living in the castle as a private resident while the investigation continued, but because Harry hadn't expected him to approach today. They walked for a moment without speaking. The lake was grey and the trees were green and the morning was cool. "I won't try to tell you anything this morning," Dumbledore said. "I know you'd find it unwelcome." "Then why are you here?" Harry asked. "Because I wanted to see you," the old man said. "Before tonight." He paused. "I wanted to see what you've become." Harry looked at him sidelong. Dumbledore was watching the lake with an expression that was not performing anything, not managing anything. It was the expression of someone very old looking at something they're trying to see honestly. "I've become myself," Harry said. "Which was always the answer, I think. You just didn't give it time." "No," Dumbledore agreed quietly. "I didn't." They walked. "The prophecy," Harry said. "You said neither can live while the other survives." "I've been thinking about that." "And?" "It doesn't say how it ends," Harry said. It doesn't say I die. It says one of us has to. He paused. I'm planning on it being him. Dumbledore was quiet. I'm not going in there to sacrifice myself, Harry said. I want that on record between us. Whatever you planned for that maze, whatever role my blood was supposed to play in a story you wrote before I could read, I'm going in with my own objectives. He looked at Dumbledore directly. And I'm coming back. Something moved in the old man's face that was the most genuine expression Harry had seen there. Not managed, not strategic. Something that might have been, in its ancient and complicated way, relief. Good, Dumbledore said simply. They reached the point where the path curved back toward the castle and Dumbledore stopped walking. Harry kept going for a few steps, then stopped and looked back. For what it's worth, Dumbledore said, what you've done since December, the proceedings, the strategy, the work. The way you've handled it. He paused. I was wrong about what you needed. I was not wrong about what you are. He looked at Harry over his glasses with those blue eyes that had spent a century watching things. Whatever happens tonight, you are not alone in this. Harry looked at him. No, he said. I know. But I didn't get there because of you. He turned and walked back toward the castle, and behind him Dumbledore stood at the edge of the lake and watched him go, and the morning light came through the clouds once, briefly, and touched the water. The maze entrance was flanked by torches and spectators and the particular carnival noise of a school event that everyone knew was also something more than that. The other three champions stood at their marked entrances, Cedric at the adjacent one, who caught Harry's eye and gave a single nod, Fleur 2 positions left, who held his gaze for a moment with an expression that said everything she'd decided not to say out loud, Victor, opposite, who had the focused stillness of an athlete before competition. Bagman's voice carried over the crowd. The rules. The timing. The scoring. Harry stood at his entrance and felt the maze ahead of him, felt it the way he felt magic in general now, as something with texture and information in it if you paid the right kind of attention. He could sense the obstacles ahead vaguely, the way you could sense weather. There was something large in the left center section that had power in it. Something fast near the back right. And the cup, he could feel the cup at the center with the specific signature of a port key, which was a sensation he recognized from the international port key Hermione had found a description of in a ministry transport document, the slight wrongness of an object that was also a door. He knew where it was. He could go straight for it. He wasn't going to. He needed to clear a path for Cedric. That had been the agreement, nobody touched it alone. He was going to move through the maze with enough speed to reach the center before anyone else and then hold position until Cedric caught up. The cannon fired. Harry went in. The maze closed behind him and the crowd noise disappeared as though a door had been shut, and he was in the dark and the green and the strange still air of an enclosed space full of magic and intent. He moved at a run, wand up, not hesitating at turns. The first obstacle came from the left, a blast-ended scrut, enormous and purposeful, bearing down the hedge corridor with its armored bulk filling the space wall to wall. Harry stopped, assessed the approximately 1-second window before it reached him, and cast a body bind that was strong enough to stop something the size of a car. The scrut hit the hex mid-charge and crashed to the ground and Harry was already stepping over its tail and running. The second obstacle was a boggart. It materialized from a dark section of hedge and resolved into the shape of Voldemort, a tall, pale, noseless figure with red eyes, white robes, moving toward him. Harry looked at it. He said, very clearly, ridiculous, and the figure became Dumbledore in a frilly pink apron, which was apparently where his subconscious went without the compounds filtering his complicated feelings about the man, and the boggart exploded into smoke with the specific violence of a joke that hadn't landed. He ran on. The third obstacle was the one he'd sensed as large and powerful in the left center, a sphinx, crouched at a corridor junction, blocking both paths with the specific immovability of something old and certain of itself. It regarded him with golden eyes and said, in a voice like gravel and honey, answer my riddle and pass. Fail and I will detain you. Harry looked at it. Go ahead. The riddle was long and layered, the kind that required holding several pieces simultaneously. He listened to it once, parsed it, and gave the answer in approximately 12 seconds. The Sphinx stepped aside without comment. He was moving faster than he should have been. He knew it from the texture of the maze around him, the sense that the obstacles had been designed for someone moving more cautiously, spending more time, getting more lost. The maze hadn't been designed for someone who could feel where the cup was and navigate directly to it. That was interesting. He reached the center with 7 minutes on the rough internal clock he'd been keeping, and the Triwizard Cup was there on its plinth in the center of the clearing, gold and gleaming and humming with the wrongness of its secondary purpose. Harry stood 10 feet from it and did not touch it. He waited. He cast a hominum revelio toward the section of maze he estimated Cedric was in, a broad, sweeping version that would pass through the hedges, and got a response signature moving fast and unobstructed. Cedric was close. 3 minutes later, Cedric came through the hedge entrance on the left side of the clearing, slightly winded, with a cut on his forearm from something he'd tangled with and his wand up. He saw Harry and stopped. "You've been here a while," Cedric said. 3 minutes. Harry nodded toward the cup. "There it is." Cedric looked at it. Then back at Harry. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. The portkey signature is active. It's set to go the moment someone makes contact." Harry paused. "I'm going to disrupt it." "Disrupt a portkey?" "Modify the destination," Harry said. "Theoretically." Cedric started. "Difficult, yes. But the mechanism is the same as any charm modification, you're changing the anchor point, not the fundamental spell." He looked at Cedric. "If I can redirect the destination, whatever's waiting at the other end doesn't get what it's expecting." He paused. "Or I can destroy it entirely. But if I destroy it and someone else made it, someone powerful, there might be a trace. A signature. Evidence of where it was supposed to go." "Keep it intact," Cedric said immediately, following the logic. "Redirect it and let it go somewhere empty. But keep the evidence." "Yes." Cedric looked at him. "You've been planning this for a long time." "Since January," Harry said. Cedric let out a breath that was something like a laugh. "All right," he said. "What do you need me to do?" "Stand back and let me work. If anything comes through the hedge while I'm doing this, I'll handle it," Cedric said, and turned to face the hedge entrances with his wand up, covering Harry's back without being asked twice. Harry walked to the cup. He didn't touch it. He crouched in front of it and looked at the portkey charm layered over its surface, could feel it clearly now, up close, the specific weave of the destination anchor embedded in the golden surface. It was sophisticated work. The kind that required real skill and specific intent. He recognized the magical signature. He sat with that recognition for exactly 2 seconds. Then he got to work. Modifying an active portkey without triggering it was the kind of thing that no textbook had a chapter on, because it was theoretically inadvisable and practically inadvisable and the kind of thing that could go badly in 6 different ways. Harry worked from first principles, understanding the charm structure, identifying the anchor point, substituting a destination coordinate that was empty and specific and harmless. A field in Scotland that he'd read about in a ministry transport document that was used as a staging area for authorized international portkey arrivals. Coordinates on record, empty, safe. It took 11 minutes. He had a moment, around minute 8, where the charm pushed back. He was rewriting an anchor set by someone with considerably more raw power than a standard enchanter, and the resistance was real and required a counterpressure that cost him. He pushed back without hesitation. He did not apologize for the force of it. The portkey charm settled into its new destination. Harry stood up. "Done," he said. Cedric turned. "The destination, empty field in Scotland," Harry said. "Ministry staging area. Authorized coordinates. When the investigation team traces the portkey's routing, they'll find the original destination still in the charm's residual memory. He looked at the cup. The original destination was a graveyard in Little Hangleton. A beat. His family's graveyard, Cedric said quietly. Yes. The cup sat on its plinth, gold and harmless now, waiting. So, Cedric said. We've been standing in the middle of the maze for 11 minutes. The crowd probably thinks we're dead. Probably, Harry agreed. Should we just, Cedric gestured at the cup. Together, Harry said. I told you. Nobody touches it alone. Cedric looked at him for a moment. You know, when I was put in this tournament, I thought it was going to be the biggest thing that ever happened to me. He paused. I had no idea it was going to be this specific kind of big. Harry almost smiled. Grab the handle, he said. On three. On three, Cedric agreed. They reached for the cup together, both hands on the handle simultaneously, and the portkey activated with the familiar lurch of a badly made fluke connection, and deposited them in a damp field in the Scottish Highlands, under a grey sky, with the particular expression of two people who had expected something catastrophic and gotten cold grass instead. Harry looked at the sky. The field was empty and quiet and smelled of heather and wet earth. In the distance there were hills. Somewhere above them a bird was doing something with the silence. Cedric started laughing. It was slightly hysterical and completely genuine. We're in Scotland, he said. We're in a field in Scotland. Ministry staging area, Harry said. I told you. I thought you were, I didn't know if it was actually going to. Cedric stopped laughing and looked at him. How did you know how to do that? I read a lot of things between January and now, Harry said. Cedric shook his head. Then he looked at the cup in Harry's hand. He didn't get what he needed. No, Harry said. He didn't. But he's still out there, Cedric said. Whatever form he's in. He's still out there and he'll try again. Yes, Harry said. He will. He held Cedric's gaze. And I'll be ready. Differently than I would have been if tonight had gone the way it was planned. He paused. I know what's coming now. I know what he needs. The next attempt will be on different terms. Cedric nodded slowly. Different terms, he said. Then, how do we get back? Harry looked at the ministry staging area post that was visible at the field's edge, a plain wooden post with a ministry insignia, designed for exactly this contingency, and pointed his wand at it. Emergency return request, he said, and cast a signal flare that went up green and sharp into the grey sky. Someone will come. They came in 4 minutes, 2 ministry transportation officers who arrived looking startled at finding the Triwizard champions in an authorized staging area, the cup in Harry's hand, and neither of them apparently harmed. Harry handed one of them the cup. You'll want to preserve the portkey charm in this, he said. The residual memory has the original destination embedded in it. It's evidence. He paused. Contact Investigator Calder at Magical Law Enforcement. He's been expecting something like this. The transportation officer looked at him with the expression of someone whose Saturday had not gone the way they'd planned. I'm 14, Harry said, preemptively. I know how it looks. Contact Calder. The return to Hogwarts was chaotic in the way that only Hogwarts events could be chaotic, the specific noise of several hundred people who had been watching two champions disappear into a maze and had been constructing increasingly catastrophic narratives about what had happened. When Harry and Cedric walked back through the maze entrance, escorted by the transportation officers, neither visibly harmed, Cedric still slightly damp from the Scottish field, the noise that the crowd produced was the compressed release of 40 minutes of held breath. Hermione reached him first, which was probably a function of how she moved through crowds when motivated. She grabbed his arm and looked at his face with the specific intensity of someone running a rapid assessment, and he said, "Fine, genuinely, I'm fine," and she made a sound that was not quite words but contained considerable content. Ron was a step behind her. He grabbed Harry's shoulder with both hands in the grip of someone who had been imagining several versions of this moment and had not entirely expected this one. You modified a portkey, he said, because apparently Hermione had already told him, or he'd gotten it from the transportation officers, or he'd simply intuited it from the Scottish field grass on Harry's shoes. You modified a live portkey. It worked, Harry said. That's so dangerous, Hermione said. But it worked, Ron said. That is not the point, it is a little the point, Harry said. Sirius arrived through the crowd with the particular motion of a man who had been standing on the spectators' side of the barrier for 40 minutes and had spent most of it not sitting down. He pulled Harry into a hug that was brief and fierce and said, against the top of his head, I heard Scotland, and Harry said, Ministry staging area, I planned it, and Sirius made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been something else. McGonagall appeared through the crowd with the transportation officers at her shoulder and her expression doing that complicated thing it did when she had been genuinely frightened and was converting it into composure in real time. She looked at Harry for one long moment with everything she wasn't saying in her face. Mr. Potter, she said. My office. All of this gets explained in order. Of course, Harry said. Calder materialized at the edge of the crowd. He'd apparently been at the event as the Ministry observer, which Harry hadn't known but should have expected. He held up the preserved cup in its evidence casing and gave Harry a look that said we will be talking about this at considerable length in the clearest possible professional terms. Harry nodded. And somewhere in the crowd, at the edge of it, standing apart from the noise and motion with his hands folded in front of him and his silver beard and his half-moon glasses and his face doing none of the things it usually did, Dumbledore watched Harry Potter come back from a maze that had been designed for a very different outcome and talk to investigators and hold his godfather and laugh at something Ron said, and something very old and very heavy moved in his expression. Not triumph. Not loss. Something that might have been, if it was possible for a man who had been wrong about something this large for this long, the beginning of understanding what he'd missed. Harry didn't look at him. He had other things to look at. Fleur found him 20 minutes later in the organized chaos outside the maze, while Cedric was being attended to by a medic for his forearm cut and Ron and Hermione were giving statements to Calder. She stood in front of him and looked at him for a moment. Scotland, she said. Seemed better than the alternative, he said. She looked at him with an expression that was fully present and fully real and contained no performance of any kind. You knew since January, she said. About the cup. About where it went. Yes. And you went in anyway. I went in prepared, he said. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment. My grandmother, she said, the one who forced the inquiry for my grandfather, she used to say that the bravest thing was not doing something without fear. It was doing something while knowing exactly what the fear was and deciding it wasn't sufficient reason to stop. Harry looked at her. Did she say what you did with the fear? She said you put it somewhere useful, Fleur said. She said fear is information. It tells you what matters. He thought about standing in front of the cup in the center of the maze, about the portkey signature, about Voldemort's graveyard in Little Hangleton and what had been waiting there. I was afraid, he said honestly. Not of the maze. Of what was at the other end. He paused. I didn't let it change the plan. No, she said. You didn't. She held out her hand, not for a handshake, not formally, just a direct and uncomplicated offer of something real. He took it. Her grip was firm. Whatever comes next, she said, you are not the only one who knows what's out there now. She looked at him steadily. Remember that. He nodded. She released his hand and went to find Cedric, and Harry stood in the June evening outside the maze that was already beginning to recede as the enchantment reversed, the hedges dropping back toward the earth, the Quidditch pitch reasserting itself. He thought about Voldemort in a graveyard that nobody had arrived at tonight. About a resurrection ritual that hadn't happened. About a body that had not been reconstructed and blood that had not been taken and a wand that had not been raised. Tonight had bought time. He didn't know how much. But he was standing in the evening light of a June day at Hogwarts, free-minded and clear-eyed and surrounded by people who were here of their own actual choice, and Voldemort was still whatever he was, smoke and rats and possessing things and waiting, and had not gotten what he needed. That was not a victory in the final sense. But it was not nothing. It was the first move, freely made, in a game that Harry had finally been allowed to play on his own terms. He rolled his shoulders once, feeling the slight magical tiredness of the work in the maze, the scrut, the boggart, the sphinx, the 11 minutes modifying a port key, and then he walked toward his friends, toward the light coming from the castle, toward whatever came next. Without hesitation. Without adjustment. Without anything in his blood telling him how to feel about it. Just himself, entirely, moving forward. Chapter 6. The first free morning. The Wizengamot convened on a Thursday in late July. Harry had been to the ministry before, briefly, memorably, in circumstances that belonged to a version of himself he was still learning to measure the distance from. The atrium with its golden statues, the lifts with their clanking grills, the particular smell of the place that was parchment and old magic, and the specific institutional staleness of a building where important things happened slowly. He knew it. He was not intimidated by it. He came with Sirius on his left and Hermione on his right, which was the structural arrangement that had developed organically over the last 7 months and had become, without anyone naming it, the architecture of how he moved through the world. Sirius handled the human terrain, the politics, the personalities, the rooms where reputation mattered and the memory of James Potter still opened doors. Hermione handled the information terrain, the documentation, the precedents, the specific language of legal argument. Harry handled everything else, which was to say he handled the center of it, the thing itself. Ron was 3 steps behind them, dressed in his best robes, which were newer than they used to be because Augusta Longbottom had made an observation in May about the importance of presenting well in formal proceedings, and Sirius had sent money without making anything of it and Ron had accepted it without making anything of it either, which was the arrangement that worked for both of them. Neville and Augusta were already inside. Calder met them at the entrance to the courtroom level with his documentation folder and the expression of a man who had been preparing for this day for 7 months and was professionally, carefully confident. "The evidence is solid," he said, walking beside Harry as they moved through the corridor. "The testimony is in order. Snape's statement is the cornerstone, it establishes the authorization chain beyond reasonable contestation." He paused. "Dumbledore's legal team will argue necessity and intent. They'll use the threat Voldemort represents as justification for the methods." "I know," Harry said. "The counter to that argument is that the legitimacy of the end doesn't retroactively authorize the method," Harry said. "And that a precedent which allows the systematic medical alteration of a minor on the basis of one person's assessment of what constitutes a greater good is not a precedent any functioning legal system can allow to stand." He glanced at Calder. "Hermione has the precedent cases. For historical instances where similar necessity arguments were rejected." Calder looked at Hermione. "All documented," she said, producing a folder from her bag that she apparently kept alphabetized. "Cross-referenced with the current charges." Calder permitted himself a small, professionally bounded expression of satisfaction. "Good," he said. "We're in courtroom 3. The gallery is full." Courtroom 3 was larger than Harry had expected. It had the particular gravity of a room where significant things had been decided over a long time, stone walls that absorbed sound, tiered seating for the Wizengamot members, a raised bench for the chief warlock and the 2 flanking arbiters. The public gallery above was indeed full. Harry saw familiar faces, McGonagall in the 3rd row, wearing her formal tartan and the expression of a woman who had written her own statement and had strong opinions about the proceedings. Fleur was in the gallery with her mother, who had come from France specifically and who had the same quality of attentiveness as her daughter but with 30 more years behind it. Several faces Harry recognized from the Board of Governors. Several he didn't recognize but who carried themselves with the specific gravity of people with institutional standing. Dumbledore was already seated at the respondents' table with his legal representative, a senior ministry solicitor named Aldous Waverley, who was well regarded, well connected, and who looked at the courtroom with the calm competence of someone who had argued important cases before and won most of them. Dumbledore himself looked, Harry thought, like himself. Which was the unnerving thing. He wore his usual robes, deep purple today, with the half-moon glasses and the long silver beard and the quality of patient attention that his face had been performing for so long it might simply have become his actual face. He met Harry's eyes briefly when Harry took his seat at the petitioner's table, and there was something in the meeting of them that was neither apology nor challenge but was something more complicated than either. Harry held the gaze for a moment, then looked forward. Amelia Bones took the Chief Warlock's chair. She looked, if anything, more settled in authority than she had at Hogwarts, the monocle, the broad shoulders, the quality of someone who had spent a career in this building and understood it at a structural level. She looked at the courtroom, let the settling silence do its work, and opened the proceedings. The charges were read. Medical misconduct under Section 12 of the Potions Regulation Act. Violation of student welfare provisions under the Hogwarts Administrative Charter. Unauthorized administration of controlled compounds to a minor. Unauthorized deployment of a magical suppressor without medical license. And the charge that had been added in June, following the analysis of the preserved portkey, conspiracy to endanger a student through deliberate obstruction of relevant information pertaining to a known threat. That last one had come from Calder's investigation of the portkey's residual memory. The graveyard coordinates had been traced. The ritual evidence at Little Hangleton, an abandoned site that Ministry investigators had attended after being pointed there by the Cups routing, had been catalogued and documented. The conclusion that someone had known what the portkey was intended for was unavoidable in the record. When the charges finished being read, Waverley said, in his measured and well-trained voice, that his client acknowledged several of the administrative charges and wished to address the context of each decision in full. He said this with the specific legal framing that acknowledged without conceding and contested without denying. Bones said, the petitioner's representative will present first. Hermione stood. She was 17 days into a summer holiday, she had been preparing this presentation for 6 months, and she looked like neither of those things were relevant because she looked like someone who had been doing this their whole life. She spoke for 40 minutes. She was precise, she was thorough, she cited every precedent, she read key passages from the diagnostic report, she entered the requisition forms into evidence, she addressed each charge with the specific statutory language and the specific documented facts that corresponded to it. Harry watched the Wisengamot members as she spoke. Augusta Longbottom had said 9 secured votes. Looking at the faces in the tiered seating, Harry estimated she'd undercounted. When Hermione sat down, Ron passed her a glass of water with the quiet attentiveness of someone who was watching out for her without making a thing of it. She took it without looking at him and drank half of it and kept her eyes forward. Waverley presented Dumbledore's response for 35 minutes. It was what Calder had predicted, the necessity argument, carefully structured. The known return of Voldemort as inevitable context. The specific requirements of the prophecy as additional context. The claim that the compounds had been administered with the intent of preservation and that their documented effects, while clinically significant, had caused no permanent harm. The argument that the portkey situation was more complicated than the charge implied, that Dumbledore had been operating from incomplete information and had not authorized the specific destination. Harry listened to every word of this. Then Bones said, Mr. Potter. You have the right to address the court directly. He stood. The courtroom was very quiet. He'd thought about what to say here for a long time. Not in the way of preparing a speech, he'd specifically decided against a speech, because a speech was a performance and he'd spent enough of his life performing the version of himself that other people found comfortable. He was going to say the true thing, in the simplest language it required. The argument you've heard is that what was done to me was necessary, he said. That the threat Voldemort represents is so significant that extraordinary measures were justified. I want to address that argument directly, because I don't think it's entirely wrong. He paused. Voldemort is real. The threat is real. The prophecy may be real. Those things are not in dispute. The courtroom was paying the kind of attention that had weight. But the argument requires you to accept something specific, Harry continued. It requires you to accept that one person, however intelligent, however experienced, however well-intentioned, has the right to make medical decisions for a child without that child's knowledge or consent, on the basis of his own assessment of what the greater good requires. He looked at the Wisengamot members. That's not a Dumbledore question. That's a question about what kind of society we are. Because if the answer is yes, if we decide that the stakes being high enough can justify that, then we've said something about every child in this country who might one day be considered important enough to manage. Silence. I'm not asking for punishment, Harry said. I'm asking for a clear answer on the principle. Because the charges exist in law for a reason. The protections exist in law for a reason. And the reason is that the alternative, allowing individuals, regardless of their reputation or their intentions, to override those protections whenever they decide the situation is serious enough, leads somewhere none of us actually want to go. He sat down. Bones looked at the Wisengamot. The court will consider the charges, she said. The deliberation took 2 hours. Harry sat at the petitioner's table and ate a sandwich Sirius had apparently smuggled in inside a legal folder and read the advanced transfiguration text he'd brought for this contingency. Ron fell asleep in his chair for 20 minutes and woke up denying it. Hermione organized her notes alphabetically and then reorganized them by date. At 2:30, Bones returned to the bench. The findings were as follows. On the medical misconduct charges, guilty on all counts. On the administrative charter violations, guilty. On the unauthorized compound administration, guilty. On the magical suppressor charge, guilty. On the conspiracy charge relating to the port key, not proven on the specific evidence currently available, with the caveat that the investigation remained open. The sentence on the proven charges, Dumbledore was removed from the position of Hogwarts headmaster, effective immediately and permanently. He was prohibited from serving in any administrative capacity over minors for a period of 20 years. He was fined substantially. The amount went into a fund that Hermione had proposed and Bones had adopted, specifically for the development of student medical rights legislation. He retained his Order of Merlin and his status in the wizarding world, because the court had weighed his historical service and the genuine sincerity of his intentions, even while finding those intentions insufficient to excuse the method. He was not imprisoned. Harry had expected this. He'd thought about it for months, whether he wanted imprisonment, whether that was the right outcome for a man who had done terrible things from genuinely complex motives. He'd arrived at the same place each time. Prison was not the point. Accountability was the point. The record was the point. The principle in the record was the point. Dumbledore received the sentence without visible reaction. Then he looked at Harry, across the courtroom, over the heads of solicitors and clerks and court officers, and for a moment his face did the thing Harry had seen it do by the lake in June. The thing that was the beginning of understanding what had been missed. He nodded once. Harry held his gaze for a moment. Then he looked forward, because there was more to do. Outside the courtroom, in the corridor with its high windows and stone floors, the noise of the wizarding world reorganized itself around the fact of what had just happened. People talked. People clustered. Reporters from the Daily Prophet and 2 other publications materialized with quick quotes, quills and shouted questions that Harry walked past without stopping. Sirius fell into step beside him and said nothing, which was exactly right. Hermione was already debriefing with Calder about the not-proven Portkey verdict. She had opinions, several of them, and was articulating them with the focused energy of someone who considered an incomplete result a problem to be addressed rather than an outcome to be accepted. Ron caught up and walked on Harry's other side and said, "You all right?" "Yes," Harry said. And it was true. Not the chemical true, not the managed true, just the actual true, the texture of actually being all right in the middle of something difficult and having it be real rather than arranged. "The last charge," Ron said carefully. "The not proven." "I know," Harry said. "We'll get there." Calder said the investigation is open. The Little Hangleton evidence is in the record. It's not gone, it just needs more. He paused. Voldemort is still out there. The investigation is still open. Those two things together will eventually produce the evidence the conspiracy charge needs. When he tries again, Ron said, not as a question. When he tries again, Harry agreed. And next time we'll be ready, and the record will be there, and it'll be cleaner. Augusta Longbottom intercepted them near the lifts. She looked, for Augusta Longbottom, extremely satisfied, a contained and precise satisfaction, like a well-executed chess endgame. 7 of the guilty verdicts passed with 12 votes or more, she said. 3 of them were unanimous. The precedent is solid. She looked at Harry. The legislation Bones is proposing, the Student Medical Rights Bill. It'll be drafted by September. Your address today will be cited in the preamble. Hermione's argument, Harry said. Your address, Augusta repeated, with the tone of someone who has decided something is true and is not going to keep arguing about it. She looked at him for a moment, her sharp eyes doing what they always did. You know what your mother used to say about this place? Harry stopped. I didn't know you knew her. Briefly. Through work she did for St. Mungo's in her last year. Augusta's expression shifted into something that had history in it. She said the ministry was a building full of people trying to decide who got to define what was normal. She said the only defense against it was being very clear in yourself about what was actually true. She paused. She'd have been very clear in herself today. Harry looked at her. Thank you, he said, and meant it at the full depth it required. Augusta patted his arm in her firm and unperformative way and went to find the lift. Sirius's house, 12 Grimmauld Place, was a different building in July than it had been in the dark years of his imprisonment. He'd spent 6 months cleaning it with a thoroughness that was almost certainly therapeutic as well as practical, and it showed. The tapestry in the hall with the Black's family tree was still there. He'd left it up deliberately, he said, because pretending his family hadn't been who they were seemed worse than acknowledging it, but everything else had been cleared of the worst of the dark objects, the rooms opened, light let in through windows that hadn't been cleaned in decades. Harry was staying there for the rest of summer, which was the arrangement that had been confirmed in June and was so obviously correct that nobody had argued about it for more than approximately 4 seconds. The Dursleys had been informed by a letter from Sirius's solicitor that contained specific legal language about guardian custody that Hermione had helped draft, and which had produced a 2-line reply from Vernon Dursley that said they were fine with the arrangement and please don't contact them again. Harry had felt exactly nothing about this, which was the most accurate emotional response he'd had to the Dursleys in 5 years. The house was quiet when they got back from the ministry. Sirius went straight to the kitchen and began making food, which was what Sirius did when he needed to do something with his hands. Harry went upstairs to his room and changed out of his formal robes and sat on the bed for a while in the quiet. The room had a window that looked out over the square, the private garden in the center, the old plane trees, the London light coming through the leaves in the late afternoon. It was the room that had been redone for him specifically, and it was the first space Harry had ever lived in that was arranged around his actual preferences rather than whatever was left over after everyone else had taken what they needed. He sat with the day for a while. Not processing it in the urgent, analytical way he'd been processing things for 7 months, just sitting with it, letting it be what it was. The case was done. Not finished, the investigation was open, the portkey evidence was in the record, Voldemort was somewhere in the world being incorporeal and planning something, but the immediate thing was done. The proceeding was over. The principal was in the record. Dumbledore was no longer headmaster. He thought about what happened next. 5th year at Hogwarts in September. McGonagall as headmistress, which was going to be an entirely different institution in specific and interesting ways. The OWLS in June, which Hermione had been preparing for since approximately 3rd year and which Harry felt, for the first time, genuinely prepared for himself. The ongoing investigation, which would require his participation at various points and which he'd give. And Voldemort. Always Voldemort. In the background of everything, the knowledge that the thing the prophecy described was not finished and would not be finished until it was. But Harry had thought about the prophecy differently since Dumbledore had told him about it in December. He'd turned it over and looked at it from every angle and arrived somewhere unexpected. The prophecy didn't scare him. It just described a situation he was already in. He was in it whether he was afraid or not, whether he was prepared or not, whether someone had spent 5 years making him compliant or 5 years making him clear. The compliance had been meant to make him a better tool. The clarity, it turned out, made him something harder to use but considerably more capable of surviving. He got up from the bed and went downstairs. Ron and Hermione arrived at 7, which was the plan, dinner at Sirius's, all of them, the first dinner of the summer that wasn't at the Burrow or at Hogwarts or in a ministry corridor. Sirius had made an enormous amount of food with the enthusiasm of someone who had spent 12 years eating nothing of quality and was still making up for it. Neville came too, with a small plant in a pot that he presented to Sirius as a house gift with a sincerity that was completely genuine and that Sirius received with a warmth that was equally genuine, and which resulted in a 15-minute conversation about the magical properties of Devil's Snare that nobody else at the table fully followed but both of them clearly enjoyed. Fleur had sent a note from France that arrived with the dinner, elegant handwriting, brief and direct. The verdict was right. The principle is in the record. I'll be watching the legislation. See you in September when I am insufferable about Beauxbatons being better at everything. FD. There was a PS, tell Granger her legal argument was exceptional. She will either say, obviously, or say it was nothing. Tell me which. Harry showed Hermione the PS. She said, obviously, and then immediately said, I mean it was simply the logical argument from the available evidence, which was both responses simultaneously. Ron said, she said both, and Harry wrote both on a scrap of parchment to send back to Fleur. The dinner was loud and overlapping and completely unregimented, several conversations happening at once, Sirius and Neville still talking about plants, Ron and Hermione arguing about Quidditch rule changes in a way that was so habitual it had become almost affectionate, Calder arriving late and staying for one glass of wine and saying he had an update on the little Hangleton evidence that he'd share when it was confirmed, which meant good news. Harry sat in the middle of it. Not managing it, not navigating it, not running any kind of calculation about who was where and what they needed from him. Just sitting in it, present and unfiltered, letting it be what it was. He had a thought about the morning of the Yule Ball, the feeling of the heat, the floor coming up, the nothing that followed. He thought about Pomfrey on her knees with her face doing something it had never done, and the hospital wing at 2 in the morning, and the fire with Sirius's head in it, and the library and Augusta Longbottom's letter and the pitch at 6 with the mist rolling back. He thought about the boy who had hit the floor of the great hall and the boy sitting at this table, and the distance between them was only 7 months but measured differently it was something closer to a whole life. Later, after the food was gone and the conversation had become comfortable and easy, Sirius came and sat beside him at the quieter end of the table. The others were still talking at the other end, some joke involving Fred and George that Ron was explaining at length. "How are you?" Sirius asked. Not the beginning of a conversation how are you. The actual question. Harry thought about it honestly. "Good," he said. "Actually good." He paused. "Strange. There's still, I'm aware that I'm different than I was. Sometimes I'll think or say something and notice that I couldn't have said that 8 months ago, and it's," he paused, looking for the right word. "Disorienting," Sirius offered. "Clarifying," Harry said. "But yes. There's a version of disorienting in it too." He looked at his hands on the table. "I keep finding things I missed. In the first 3 years. Things that should have been obvious." He paused. "Second year. The chamber. I went in there thinking I was going to die and came back and was essentially fine within 48 hours. I was 12. He shook his head. "That's not resilience. 12-year-olds don't process nearly dying that cleanly." "No," Sirius said quietly. "They don't. I'm not trying to relitigate it," Harry said. "It's just, noticing. The way you notice the shape of something after you can see it clearly. He looked at Sirius. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life angry about it. The anger is there and I've used it and it did what it was supposed to do. But I'm not interested in living in it. Sirius studied him. No, he said. You're not. What I am interested in, Harry said, is what comes next. 5th year. The investigation. Voldemort when he eventually manages what he was trying to manage in June. He paused. And I want to find out what I can do. Properly. I've had 6 months on the pitch in the morning, I've done the coursework, but there's more and I want to find it. He looked at Sirius. Will you work with me? This summer. The things you know from Aura training, from whatever you were doing when you were my father's age and probably doing things you shouldn't have been. Sirius laughed, the clean, unguarded version of the laugh that Harry had learned was the real one, the one that had survived Azkaban intact. Moony and I were doing things we absolutely shouldn't have been, he said. And yes. Absolutely yes. He looked at Harry with the expression Harry had come to understand was the one Sirius wore when he was being his most genuine and knew it. Nothing would make me happier. Good, Harry said. Remus is coming next week, Sirius said. He's been reading everything about magical education theory for 15-year-olds in preparation. He made a curriculum. Of course he did, Harry said. It has subsections, Sirius said. Of course it does. They sat together at the end of the table in the summer evening, the noise of friends around them, the window open to the London night. Harry thought about September, about McGonagall's Hogwarts, about the investigation and the record and the legislation and Voldemort somewhere in the dark planning his next move. Then he stopped thinking about it and listened to Ron explaining Quidditch rules with increasing exasperation to Hermione, who was winning the argument by citing the actual rulebook from memory, and Neville describing a hybrid Devil's Snare variant he wanted to attempt to Sirius, who was listening with the expression of someone who had genuinely never expected to care about plants and was reassessing. And outside the window London did what London always did, which was be enormous and indifferent. And full of ordinary life going about itself in the summer dark. On the first morning of August, Harry got up at 6. He went downstairs quietly, made tea, and stood at the kitchen window with it. The square outside was grey and still, the plane trees silver in the early light, a single pigeon investigating something on the pavement. He had no particular plan for the morning. Sirius had said he'd be up by 8. Remus wasn't arriving until Thursday. The day was simply itself, an open, unclaimed morning in a house that was his, with people in it who were his, and nowhere he was required to be and nothing he was required to perform. He stood at the window with his tea and thought about exactly nothing in particular for a while, which was itself something new. The ability to simply be in a moment without it being managed. Without the low-frequency hum of something in his blood telling him what to feel and who to trust and how large to let himself be. He was 14, 15 in 3 weeks, which Sirius had mentioned 17 times and would almost certainly mention again. He was the subject of ongoing ministry proceedings and the center of a prophecy that described a confrontation with the most dangerous dark wizard in a century. He had friends who were genuinely his and a guardian who was genuinely his and a magical capacity that nobody had fully mapped and that he was still learning the dimensions of. He had a record in the Wisengamot that contained a principle about the rights of children that would become law before he finished his OWLS. He had a great deal of work ahead of him. He had Voldemort to eventually face, and he knew more about what that meant than he was supposed to know, and he was more prepared than he was supposed to be, and the alchemy of those two things together was something he suspected even Voldemort hadn't accounted for yet. He had a morning, right now, that belonged entirely to him. He drank his tea. The pigeon found whatever it was looking for and flew away. The light came up slowly in the square, touching the tops of the trees first and then the railings and then the stone of the pavement, the ordinary London morning assembling itself piece by piece. Somewhere in the house above him, a floorboard creaked as Sirius turned over in his sleep. Harry put down his cup and stood in the kitchen light, and what he felt was the specific, unprocessed, unmedicated texture of his own life, its weight, its possibilities, its real and complicated truth. He felt it without adjustment. He felt it without the chemistry of someone else's design. He felt it entirely, as himself, for the first time that he could remember. And it was enough, more than enough, it was, in fact, everything. He turned from the window and began making breakfast, because Sirius would be up at 8 and would be hungry, and the morning was his to do with what he chose, and what he chose was this, to be here, present and clear and entirely, irreversibly himself. The door of the kitchen was open to the hall. The house was quiet. Outside, London was waking up. The summer light came through the window and fell across the floor in a long warm bar and sat there, simple and unhurried, like something that had been waiting patiently for the right conditions. Like something that had always been there. Just waiting to be seen.